Romantic Tales. Chapter 75. Is there anything else? Yi frowned and continued. Every generation of the Ding King's residents produced talented people, and they were well-versed in both political and military affairs. Instead, the imperial family who came from the same bloodline paled in comparison. The most outstanding one was the first Prince Ding Emolonyan. It was said that if he didn't marry a princess from the previous dynasty as his wife, he might have a higher chance of ascending the throne than the great ancestor. Then there was Mo Lufeng, who was able to rule the country through martial arts. As for Mo Xiuyao, he was once hailed as a genius who wasn't inferior to his ancestor. If it wasn't for the fact that he was only 13 years old when Mo Lufeng passed away, the throne might have been inherited by him from the start. The room was silent. Yi silently picked up the teapot and poured some tea for Su Hongyu. Only then did she hear Su Hongyu ask, "That's right." In a short 5 to 6 years, the Ding King's residence was ruined. What was supposed to be a peerless general fell to the mortal world. The legend of the Ding King's residence being invincible was also shattered. "Li, do you know that at that time, the judgment that Mo Xiuyao was a genius who wasn't inferior to his ancestor was made by your maternal grandfather. Because of this, your maternal grandfather had regretted it for more than 10 years. Uncle, what do you mean? Yi was startled. Politics had never been severed since ancient times. Even now, with the decline of the Ding King's residence, various private speculations had never stopped. But hearing it from her maternal uncle's mouth, Yi couldn't help but be shocked. Under the shock, Yi quickly calmed down and said, "I heard that Prince Ding was indeed brilliant when he was young." Then even if maternal grandfather didn't say those words, the people of the Ding King's residence would still be targeted. Maternal grandfather only admired his talent and wasn't able to foresee the future. This matter. Maternal grandfather doesn't need to blame himself. Su Hongyu nodded and praised. Li is already very knowledgeable at such a young age. Uncle is telling you this in hopes that you will understand the situation of the Ding King's residence. Although in the eyes of outsiders, the Ding King's residence has already declined to the point that it only has a false reputation left. But Yi looked at him and continued, "But the Ding King's residence still has a trump card that the imperial family doesn't dare to touch him? Not bad. If not for this, Mo Xiuyao would have died of illness long ago. The reason why no one dared to touch him was because they were afraid of harming him. The deaths of the previous 2 generations of Prince Ding have already raised suspicions. If something were to happen to Mo Xiuyao, I'm afraid it would shake the foundation of the country." Yi sighed softly. She felt so cold that she gripped the teacup to absorb the warmth. Did His Majesty choose Li because he was also afraid of the Su family? Isn't he afraid that after the marriage between the Su family and the Ding family? Su Hongyu's gaze was cold. The ancestors of the Su family will never betray us as long as the royal family doesn't do anything to the Su family. There are people who believe such words. Yi was puzzled. Even a signed treaty could be torn to shreds at any time, let alone an oath. Su Hongyu glared at her in displeasure. This was written into the Su family's family rules. The Su family has been passed down for hundreds of years and is known for its integrity. Yi shrunk her neck and silently asked curiously, "Uncle, did the Su family make any oaths to the previous emperor?" Cough cough. Su Hongyu coughed a few times and glared at Yi in annoyance. Yi could only shrug her shoulders and hold her chin in silence. That's why, as a famous family that had not fallen for hundreds of years, how could they be so pedantic? It's not that we won't betray, it's just that the reward for betrayal isn't high enough. In the end, he glared at Yi. Su Hongyu sternly said, "In short, unless it is absolutely necessary, the Su family will not betray the royal family." The Su family did not lack fame or wealth, and they were not obsessed with power. The throne? What was the use of that? A wise ruler had to be prepared to exhaust himself to death. If they wanted to enjoy messing around, they had to be prepared to go down in history and infamy. Li understands. "Eldest uncle, who do you think wants to ruin my marriage with Prince Ding? If it's not the emperor?" Yi asked. Su Hongyu shook his head. "That's hard to say. Qingchen only said that it was a woman. But we filtered through almost all the women related to Prince Ding and still couldn't find out who it was. Prince Ding himself should know. Did he say anything?" At the mention of this, a trace of displeasure flitted across Su Hongyu's elegant face. Seeing Yi shake her head, he snorted softly and said, He should know what he's doing. If something else happens that shouldn't happen, he's better off not being her husband. The Su family can afford to raise their granddaughter. Li Er thinks that it might be a woman who admires Prince Ding. Yili didn't feel embarrassed in front of Su Hongyu, so she directly voiced her suspicions. Su Hongyu looked at her with a smile and said, "A woman who admires Prince Ding? If you're talking about Prince Ding when he was young. At that time at least half of the noble ladies in the capital adored him. But there wasn't a single one who had the ability to bribe the heavenly pavilion. Although Han Mingyue loves money as much as his life, he was also Prince Ding's best friend when he was young. He wouldn't provoke Prince Ding's fiancée for money." Then, what about the woman who admires Emo Shuyao and has a good relationship with Han Mingyue? Su Hongyu raised his eyebrows. "There's one, but it can't be her." Yili blinked. Su Hongyu calmly put down his teacup and said, "Noble consort Lu." This time it was Yi Li's turn to cough. "Luke. Noble consort Lu? What's so strange about that?" Noble consort Lu was known as the most talented woman in the capital. Even your eldest brother had never looked him in the eye. Instead he spoke gently to Prince Ding at that time. Unfortunately, Prince Ding already had someone else at that time. Otherwise they would have been a rare couple. Also, noble consort Lu was good at painting. Han Mingyue's painting skills were also known in the capital when he was young. The second volume of his painting of the Chu capital was of noble consort Lu. It's still priceless even now. However, after noble consort Lu entered the palace, this painting was bought at a high price. For some reason, Su Hongyu gave up on these heavy topics and began to gossip with Yi Li. Yi Li thought of the woman with cold eyes like pear blossoms in the palace. She was indeed worthy of being called a national beauty. "Uncle, why did you say it wasn't her?" "Your eldest brother knew noble consort Lu. Although he didn't see her face and it's been so many years, your eldest brother is sure it wasn't noble consort Lu. Also, what kind of place do you think the palace is? A noble consort can casually walk around outside the palace with a group of people in the middle of the night." Yili nodded. She didn't really think it was noble consort Lu. Although she noticed that noble consort Lu despised her in the palace, she still deliberately picked on her. However, that woman's eyes didn't have any strong hostility or killing intent. "Who was Emo Shiyao's original fiancé?" Yili asked. He was really curious. What kind of woman could defeat noble consort Lu and win Emo Shiyao's heart? Also, it was reasonable to say that someone who could become Emo Shiyao's fiancé must be from a famous family. However, Yili searched her memory for a long time and couldn't find any famous noble family that had a beautiful daughter who died an unfortunate death 7 years ago. Su Hongyu glanced at her in disappointment and said, "Su Zayadi?" Yili nodded. "Sounds like a very beautiful woman." Su Hongyu looked at his niece expressionlessly. Once again he regretted that he didn't insist on bringing Li Er back to the Su family to be educated. Look at how she was raised by the Yi family now. He was talking about her future husband's ex-fiancée. Even if she was dead, she should at least show some interest, right? Only then did the world-renowned Sir Su realize that when his niece mentioned Prince Ding or Prince Li, she had never shown the slightest bit of shyness that a girl should have. She had never even blushed. Chapter 76. Which family is this Miss Su from? There didn't seem to be any Su family in the capital. Why do you think Old Master Su came to the Prince Ding mansion to deliver the betrothal gifts? Old Master Su? Su Zayadi is Old Master Su's granddaughter. Su Hongyu said lightly. Then why did Old Master Su come? He came to see what kind of woman Prince Ding, who was supposed to be his grandson-in-law, married. Also, Su Zayadi's death was a great blow to Prince Ding, who was already seriously ill. Old Master Su treated Prince Ding like his own grandson, so he came to support the Prince Ding mansion. Looking at her uncle's unhappy face, Yili smiled helplessly and said, "Uncle, I know what you mean. Prince Ding and I get along very well, so you don't have to worry." Su Hongyu looked at her disapprovingly and said, "What do you mean by very well? If you are the first one he gives up when he has to make a choice, then how can that be called very well?" Yili smiled lightly, "But if I have to choose between uncle, grandfather, cousin and Prince Ding, I won't choose him. How long have we known each other? Family is naturally more important. You are husband and wife. In the future you will live with him for the rest of your life, not with uncle and grandfather. Uncle, do you think Prince Ding is the kind of man who will give up everything as long as he cares about you?" Yes, as long as you can capture his heart. After a long talk, Su Hongyu left a lot of official, secret and unofficial records for Yi Li to read when she had time. Then he left with Su Hongyan under Minister Ye's uneasiness. Yi Li looked at her father's complicated eyes and slightly bowed to him. Then she leisurely returned to her own Qingyi pavilion to study the history books. Yi Li and Mo Shuyao's wedding was set for May 20th. It was said to be the best day in May. It was said that Yi Shangshu was not very satisfied with this date. After all, it was not a particularly auspicious day. Yi Ying's marriage situation had already made Yi Shangshu very angry. If Yi Li's marriage had any problems, Yi Shan and Yi Lin would not be able to get married. However, the Ding Palace and the Su family, including Yi Li herself, did not have any opinion on the auspicious date. Moreover, if they did not choose this date, then the wedding date would have to be pushed back to August at the very least. June and July were even less suitable for weddings. When Yi Li was kidnapped, no matter if it was the Ding Palace or the Su family, they would never allow the wedding to be postponed. Therefore, Minister Ye's dissatisfaction was naturally ignored. In the middle of May, Yi Li's leisurely life came to an end. The originally quiet Qing Yixian also became bustling with people coming and going. Every day there were countless things that had to be sent to Qing Yixian. There were countless account books and lists that had to be personally reviewed by Yi Li. Even with the help of the two mamas, Yi Li was still very tired. When the people in the capital saw that the Yi family, Su family and the Ding Palace were not affected by the rumors and were preparing for the wedding, the half-believing rumors gradually subsided. I'm so envious of Li. The Ding Palace's wedding will definitely be the grandest wedding in the past 10 years. In Qing Yixian, Mu Rongting laid on the soft couch without any care for her image as she hugged the first-grade expensive silk that had just been sent over. Yi Li, Qin Zheng and Hua Tianxiang were sorting out the account books. Not far away, Yi Shan and Yi Lin were also quietly doing needlework. Outside the door there was still the noise of people coming and going. Hua Tianxiang raised her head to look at her in the gap between looking at the account books and said, Li didn't invite you to be envious and jealous. If you have the time to talk nonsense, why don't you come over and see if there's anything you can help with? But you're right. Qin Zheng was writing and drawing on the account books as she asked, Does Wang Furen really not intend to help you with the wedding at all? If this spreads out, it won't be good for her reputation. Yi Li smiled faintly. Old Madam also added a lot of dowry. She's not feeling well these 2 days. She said that fourth sister is sick in the Li Palace and has to go over to take care of her. She left early in the morning. Mu Rongting snorted at this. Who has heard of a mother running over to take care of her daughter who has just been married for less than a month? But, could Ying really be sick? I actually didn't see her coming back to show off these days. Hua Tianxiang raised her eyebrows and smiled, then she has to have the ability to show off. If Li Wang treats her well, maybe she can come back to show off her newlywed bliss or something. But now I heard that Princess Xixia is still pestering Li Wang every day. It's already good that she hasn't become a resentful woman. Qin Jing shook her head. She was not interested in these rumors. Instead, she was more concerned about Yi Li's marriage itself. I really don't know what Wang Furen is thinking. Everyone knows how many betrothal gifts the Ding Palace has sent. Even if the Yi family adds more, it won't be a loss to her. Isn't she losing face for the Yi family? Hua Tianxiang said, It's not like you don't know what Wang Furen's background is. Even if she is now Yi Daren's legal wife, her status is not enough to preside over Li Er's marriage. At that time, I'm afraid old Madam Yi will have to appear personally. By the way, there is no woman in the Ding Palace who can make the decision. Li, did Prince Ding mention who can make the decision in the Ding Palace? Yi Li nodded and said, Originally, Xiaoyang Grand Princess had this intention. However, although Prince Ding calls Xiaoyang Princess as aunt, it is said that they are of the same generation in terms of seniority. So Xiaoyang Grand Princess means to invite Shifu Grand Princess. Wow! Murong Ting cried out in surprise, almost jumping up from the soft couch. Seeing that everyone is looking at her, Murong Ting chuckles and says, Great Elder Princess Shifu. She's the late Emperor's aunt. Even Prince Ding of the previous generation has to respectfully call her imperial sister. I heard that Shifu Grand Princess is 75 years old this year. Qin Jing nodded and said, In fact, if it weren't for Li Er's marriage this time, I would have forgotten that this princess is still alive. I heard that this princess has stopped caring about the affairs of the world more than 20 years ago. I didn't expect that she could come out to support Prince Ding's wedding this time. Hua Tianxiang waved her hand and said with a smile, "It's nothing strange. My grandfather said that great elder princess used to like Prince Ding the most. When Prince Ding was born, great elder princess even held him. It was said that when Prince Ding had an accident and almost died, it was great elder princess who took care of him day and night. In short, Prince Ding will invite great elder princess to preside over the wedding, which shows his sincerity to Li Li," Murong Ting said with a smile. "So I said that Li Er's wedding is probably the grandest wedding in the last 10 years. I heard that the dignitaries of other countries will also come to the wedding." Yi Li frowned and said, "What does the wedding of Prince Ding Mansion have to do with the dignitaries of other countries?" "Li Li, don't underestimate the prestige of King Ding Mansion. King Ding Mansion has been established for 100 years, and it is not an exaggeration to say that it is powerful. Basically, all the countries close to Dechu State have dealt with King Ding Mansion." Yi Li nodded and said, "I understand. They're here to see a joke." The only descendant of the prestigious King Ding Mansion, the current Prince Ding, was a disfigured disabled person in a wheelchair. What else could make the dignitaries of various countries happier than this? Perhaps the royal families of various countries were more interested in this wedding than the change of the emperor of Dechu State. Everyone was silent for a moment and couldn't help but sigh. Yes, those envoys of various countries definitely didn't come to congratulate Prince Ding on his wedding, but to see how the only descendant of King Ding Mansion, who had been silent for 7 years, looked like and whether he could still pose a threat to them. Chapter 77. Li Yi Li waved her hand carelessly and said, "It's not a big deal. What can they do to me in the capital of Dechu State? If you have the time to worry about this, why don't you help me organize these things? Tomorrow second aunt will look through them." Yi Li had a headache as she looked at the messy gift lists and account books in front of her. Only now did she know that Arabic numerals and double-entry bookkeeping were really good things. But now was not the time to be in the limelight. She would have plenty of time to slowly organize them when she arrived at the Ding King's residence. Hua Tianxiang and Qin Jing looked speechlessly at the account books that still had more than half of them in front of them and weakly lowered their heads. When they returned home, they must learn from their mother how to manage the household. There were too many of these things. Yi Lin and Yi Shan listened to them chatting on the side. They were both envious and sympathetic towards Yi Li. But they also knew that they could not get a word in on this. They could only listen and lower their heads to do the work in their hands. Murong Ting, who was originally lying weakly on the soft couch, suddenly jumped up and rushed to the half-open window. She leaned out and looked around for a long time before retracting her head in confusion. Hua Tianxiang looked at her and said, "What's wrong? Is there something outside the window?" Murong Ting shook her head and looked at Yi Li without saying anything. Yi Li smiled faintly and said, "I think I just saw a green bird fly by outside the window. Did Murong Ting also see it?" Murong Ting blinked and said with annoyance, "Yes, I saw a very beautiful bird. Who would have thought that when I reached the window I would disappear?" Qin Jing giggled and covered her mouth. "Birds fly so fast, how could they wait for you?" Hua Tianxiang gave her a sideways glance. "When did you start liking birds? If you really like it, ask your father to catch one for you. Otherwise, just buy a beautiful one. You don't need to be so surprised." "I'm happy." Murong Ting raised her small face and proudly laid back on the soft couch. She also glared at Yi Li without a trace. Yi Li pursed her lips and smiled. Of course she knew what Murong Ting had heard. In the past few days, there had been a few strange people who wanted to visit the Yi residence without going through the main entrance, but they were all thrown out by the bodyguards that Mo Xiuyao had sent to protect them in secret. However, it was rare for someone to barge in during the day. "Miss, the Crown Prince of West Hill Genom of Gojoseon has sent a gift to congratulate you and Prince Ding on your wedding." Outside the door, the butler of the Yi residence came to report in person. Yi Li frowned and said, "The Crown Prince of West Hill Genom of Gojoseon? Shouldn't the gifts be sent directly to King Ding's residence?" The steward said respectfully, "Crown Prince Genom of Gojoseon said that this gift was specially prepared by Xiling for the future princess consort of Dinghua. Therefore it must be sent directly to Miss to show the sincerity of Xiling Kingdom." "Where is Crown Prince Genom of Gojoseon now? Is father here?" Yi Li asked. "In the hall. Master has just returned and is accompanying him in the hall," the steward said. Yi Li nodded, "I know. Please wait for father and Crown Prince Genom of Gojoseon. I will go out later. The steward excused himself. Murongting pulled Yili worriedly and said, Yili, be careful when you go out. This Crown Prince Genom of Gojoseon might not come with good intentions. Yili raised her eyebrows. The noble ladies in the capital did not know much about this. Murongting had followed General Murong for a long time when she was young, so she should know more than them. Qing Wan and others served Yili to change her clothes and redo her makeup. Murongting stood aside and said what she knew. The Crown Prince Genom of Gojoseon of West Hill is the younger brother of the current West Hill Emperor. He is also a famous general of West Hill. But 20 years ago he was defeated by Prince Ding's father, the regent Mo Lufeng. At that time my father was only a small lieutenant. I heard from my father that Genom of Gojoseon was defeated miserably in the battle. He even lost an arm in the chaos. After that, Genom of Gojoseon sent people to assassinate the regent many times, but they all failed at the last minute. You know, the regent has died long ago. If Genom of Gojoseon holds a grudge, then this grudge could only be held on her and Mo Xiuyao as Mo Liufeng's son and daughter-in-law. So Crown Prince Genom of Gojoseon is here to find trouble? Qin Zheng's pretty face turned pale. She looked at Yili uneasily and said, Should we send someone to inform Prince Ding? Yili shook her head and said, No need. Prince Ding should know very soon. Moreover, Crown Prince Genom of Gojoseon would not come to make things difficult for a girl in the boudoir. That would be too embarrassing for Shilling State and Genom of Gojoseon. Even if he wanted to find trouble, he should be targeting Mo Xiuyao. They were not married yet. Looking in the mirror, Yili saw that she had tidied up properly. She stood up and said, I'll go take a look first. You guys wait for me here. Murongting rushed to stand beside Yili and said firmly, I'll go with you. Tianxiang and Jing'er stay. Yili did not know whether to laugh or cry. Murong, I'm not going to war. Murongting insisted, I don't care. Even if I secretly follow you, it's fine. If that Crown Prince Shannon has any ulterior motives, I can save you. Plotting against the future Princess Ding in public in Dechu State? Only Murongting could think of such a thing. Hua Tianxiang waved her hand and said, Forget it. Lier, take Murong with you. He just loves to watch the fun. Murongting did not care what they thought. She happily hugged Yili's arm and said, Let's go, let's go. Father. After entering the hall, Yili realized that the steward's report was too careless. She thought that only her father and the guests would be present. She did not expect that Mo Jingli and Yi Ying would also be sitting with them. Murongting threw her a look that said, Why is he everywhere? Yili helplessly smiled at her and went forward to greet Minister Yi. In front of outsiders, Minister Yi was very willing to play the role of a good father who doted on his daughter. He affectionately smiled at Yili and said, Lier has come. Is Miss Murong also here? Murongting curled her lips and said with a smile, This junior has come uninvited. Please forgive me, uncle. Minister Yi smiled and said, Not at all. This official is deeply gratified that Lier has such a good friend as Miss Murong. Lier, Miss Murong, this is Crown Prince Shannon of Shilling State, Genon of Gojoseon. Only then did the two of them turn their gazes to the young man sitting to the side. Shilling State was located in the northwest of Dechu State. Its customs were very different from Dechu State's. However, there was one interesting point. Shilling State called itself Deling while Dechu State was called Dongchu. Dechu State, on the other hand, called itself Dechu State in Shilling. Just from the way they addressed each other, it could be seen that the relationship between the two countries was not harmonious. Crown Prince Shannon of Genon of Gojoseon was tall and straight. His facial features were deep and angular as if they were carved by a knife. Yili could clearly see that his eyes were faintly dark purple. It was said that the Emperor of Shilling had brown eyes. This Crown Prince's appearance clearly showed that he was not a pure Shilling bloodline. Greetings, Crown Prince. Even the carefree Murongting still showed the proper etiquette in front of a foreign envoy. Crown Prince Shannon of Genon of Gojoseon sized up the two of them without any scruples. He quickly gave up on Murongting and completely turned his gaze to Yili. After a while he said, The king's consort has been appointed. Miss Murong, there is no need to be so polite. This one is Lei Tingfeng. Lei was the surname of Shilling. It was good that there was no language barrier. Minister Yi looked at the imposing Crown Prince Shannon of Genon of Gojoseon in front of him, then looked at Yili. He coughed lightly and said, Li Crown Prince Shannon of Gojoseon specially came to give you a congratulatory gift. Chapter 78. Yili nodded and said, "Many thanks to the heir. I've troubled the heir to make this trip. I hope that the Dechu state can make the heir feel at home." Lei Tingfeng laughed loudly and said, "Of course, this little prince has admired the scenery of the Dechu state for a long time. I will definitely take a good look around. Come, bring out the gift this heir has prepared for the princess consort of Ding." Lightly clapping his hands, two men who looked like guards walked in. One of them was holding a long and narrow carved wooden box. Looking at the length and size of the box, Yili had a bad feeling. This gift probably wasn't a normal gift. Lei Tingfeng made a hand gesture, and the other man accepted the order and opened the wooden box. A burst of biting cold air greeted them. Minister Ye's face sank. He stood up and said in a deep voice, "Heir, what do you mean by this?" Lei Tingfeng raised his eyebrows and said in confusion, "This is the gift this little prince's father and uncle personally chose for the princess consort. Is there something wrong with it?" Minister Yi said, "My daughter's wedding is imminent. What do you mean by giving her a sword?" A sword was a lethal weapon. It was inauspicious. Inside the intricately carved wooden box was a long sword with an ancient appearance. Even though it was still in the scabbard, one could still feel the cold light and killing intent. This was clearly a peerless treasure sword that had been tempered by a sea of blood. "This is a gift that my country and my father specially found to show our sincerity. Or, does everyone here really not know the origin of this sword?" Lei Tingfeng carelessly crossed his arms and looked at the people in front of him with a smile that wasn't a smile. Hearing the contempt in his tone, Mo Jingli's brows wrinkled. He stood up and looked at the sword in the box. Mu Rongting's heart moved. She looked at Yili with some hesitation. "This is cloud grasping." After a long time, Mo Jingli said in a deep voice. Lei Tingfeng praised, "Li King has good eyes. That's right, this is the cloud grasping sword." Everyone was moved. This was not an ancient sword, but its reputation was definitely not inferior to any of the legendary swords. This sword had the same name as the first prince, Mo Lanyun. It was the weapon that Mo Lanyun used to conquer the world. It was also the sword of Prince Ding for generations to come. This sword had followed successive princes of the kingdom, establishing Prince to gallop through the battlefields unrivaled. No one knew how many people's blood it had drunk. Until 7 years ago, when the previous Prince Ding Mo Shiwen died of an illness at the border, this sword also disappeared without a trace. Countless people searched for it openly and secretly, but they could not find a trace of it. This gift was indeed of sufficient weight and sincerity. Lei Tingfeng clapped his hands and said with a smile, "Ever since I found out that the cloud-embracing sword was missing, I don't know how much effort father put into sending people everywhere to search for it. His hard work finally paid off. He found this sword in North D 1 year ago. Just in time for Prince Ding's wedding, I'll return it to you. What do you think of Princess Ding?" Minister Ye's face was a little dignified. He stood up and said to Lei Tingfeng, "I really have to thank you for such a generous gift." It was not an exaggeration to say that the cloud-embracing sword was the national treasure of Dechu State. Minister Yi did not even dare to refuse Lei Tingfeng's gift. Minister Yi could not help but secretly regret that he did not refuse the visit of Prince Ding of Genom of Gojoseon. Lei Tingfeng nodded with satisfaction. He raised his eyebrows and said with a smile, "To tell you the truth, when I obtained such a treasure, I also wanted to take it for myself. However, this cloud-embracing sword seemed to have a spirit. I spent countless efforts and still could not pull it out. In the end, although I found a first-class swordsmith to pull out the sword, it was a pity that the sword did not listen to me at all. Even the #1 swordsman of West Hill could not control it. I thought that this cloud-embracing sword might only belong to the king's mansion. Therefore I wanted to invite Princess Ding to test the sword." Minister Yi said unhappily, "My daughter does not know swordsmanship. Besides, if Prince Ding wants to test the sword, you should find Prince Ding." Lei Tingfeng looked at Yili and said with a smile, "Is Princess Ding not a member of the king's mansion? It is said that 100 years ago, the first Princess Ding had killed 16 enemies with this sword and saved Prince Ding's life. Since then it has been passed down as a much-told story. It can be seen that this sword does not need the bloodline of the king's mansion. It can be matched with Prince Ding's partner. What do you think, Princess Ding?" Before Yili opened her mouth, Mo Jingli snorted and said, Infanta Qing Yun is a peerless woman with both pen and sword. It is not surprising that she can use the cloud-embracing sword. Prince Genom of Gojoseon wants Yili to use the cloud-embracing sword. Are you deliberately making things difficult for my Dechu state? Who doesn't know that Yili can't even perform a complete set of swordsmanship? Lei Tingfeng smiled. This prince believes in the judgment of the Ding King's household. Throughout the history of the Ding King's concubines, not a single one of them was not a stunning woman. Emo Jingli mocked. This generation is an exception. Murong Ting said unjustly, Prince Shannon, you want a woman who has never practiced martial arts to perform with a sword that you can't even pull out? Does West Hill like to force people to do things? Is it forcing people to do things? Why don't you ask Princess Ding? Father ordered that this sword must be given to Princess Ding. Is it possible that I can only bring it back to West Hill? This was already a threat. Lei Tingfeng's meaning was obvious. If the future Princess Ding couldn't pull out the cloud-embracing sword and couldn't control it, then don't blame him for bringing the sword back to West Hill. If that was the case, not to mention Great Chu's face, even its foundation would be lost. Third sister, why don't you try? Maybe you can pull it out. Yi Ying said softly, Prince Shannon of West Hill has given us such a valuable gift. If we don't accept it, won't we be rude to the neighboring country? Minister Yi frowned and glanced at Yi Ying. He was thinking about whether Yi Li's refusal to pull out the sword or her inability to pull it out was more embarrassing. Prince Ding has arrived. An announcement was made outside the door. Emo Shuyao appeared at the gate with Ajin. Everyone present secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Murong Ting secretly winked at Yi Li. Lei Tingfeng, who had been sitting in the chair casually, sat up straight the moment Emo Shuyao came in. His eyes swept over Emo Shuyao's calm and gentle face like a knife. Then he turned his head to look at Yi Li. Yi Li laughed in her heart. This prince was probably evaluating whether the cloud-embracing sword was more important in Emo Shuyao's heart or her, his fiancée. Why did Emo Shuyao come? Greetings to Prince Ding. I, Lei Tingfeng, have heard a lot about you. Lei Tingfeng stood up and smiled. Prince Ding is too polite. I had the honor of seeing Genin, King of Gojoseon, when I was young. We haven't seen each other for many years. I'm sure Prince's style is still the same? Emo Shuyao lightly nodded in return. Lei Tingfei's eyes twitched. He quickly smiled and said, Father is in good health. He often talks to me about Prince's style in the past. He hopes that I can imitate him. Emo Shuyao's expression didn't change. He calmly said, Prince is too kind. Now that I've seen Prince Ding, I know that Genin, King of Gojoseon, has a successor. Seeing the two men in front of her chatting warmly in this tense atmosphere, Yi Li inexplicably wanted to laugh. She didn't know who it was that said diplomacy was a very feminine activity. After the greetings, Emo Shuyao moved his wheelchair to Yi Li's side. He softly said, Li is in a good mood? Yi Li lightly smiled and said, Genin, King of Gojoseon, sent a very precious gift. It just so happens that Prince is also here. How about we share it? Emo Shuyao smiled and nodded. His gaze fell on the embracing cloud sword in the box. His gaze was calm and without any ripples. It was as if there really was an ordinary sword in the box. He turned to Lei Tingfeng and said, Your Majesty and Prince have troubled you. This sword has been lost for many years. I didn't expect to see it again today. Lei Tingfeng raised his eyebrows and said, The embracing cloud sword is Dechu State's most precious treasure. It should be returned intact. I just don't know if I'll be able to see the glory of this famous sword. Chapter 79. Ajin. Ajin stepped forward and took the sword from the West Hill Guard's hands. She carefully carried it to Emo Shuyao. Emo Shuyao took it with one hand. He raised his head and asked, What do you think, Miss Li? Yi Li lowered her head and reached out to touch the ancient scabbard. She nodded and said, Although I don't know this, I know it is a good sword. Yi Li was indeed not familiar with the way of the sword. The only swords she had seen in her previous life were the taiji swords played by grandpas and grandmas in the park. On the modern battlefield, swords were not even used for cold weapons. Instead, short knives, daggers, and ame daggers were more suitable for close combat. Yi Li slowly grasped the sword hilt. She was not in a hurry to pull it out. If this sword was really as difficult to pull out and control as Lei Tingfeng had described, then the scabbard and the sword blade must have some kind of mechanism. Emo Shuyao smiled as he covered Yi Li's hand with his and raised the sword blade with his other hand. Under everyone's gaze, Yili acutely sensed Emo Xiaoyao's hand move slightly and then pull it out. A cold light flashed and the sword roared like a dragon. The entire hall seemed to freeze, but it was only for a moment. Yili quickly sensed the majestic fighting spirit and overwhelming killing intent from the sword blade. This was a dangerous aura that only those who had been on the battlefield could sense. Unknowingly, Emo Xiaoyao had already let go of her. Yili waved her sword to the side and the ancient painting on the wall not far away cracked. Good sword. Yili sighed in admiration. She could cut the ancient painting with the sharpness of the sword blade. It was not an exaggeration to say that she could even cut a strand of hair. Holding the sword steadily, Yili calmly looked at Lei Tingfeng, who was staring at her. Before anyone could react, Emo Xiaoyao had already taken the cloud-embracing sword from Yili and sheathed it. Lei Tingfeng looked at the ancient painting on the wall that only had half of it left. After a long while, he let out a sigh and said, "It's indeed a good sword." As for whether Yili could control this sword or not, no one cared anymore because she had already pulled out the incomparably sharp sword in her hand. Third young mistress Yi did not have the strength to truss a chicken. It was enough for her to be able to hold the sword firmly. If she was forced to practice the sword, even the crown prince of Genom of Gojoseon, who came with hostility, would be embarrassed to ask. Facing such a situation, Minister Yi stroked his beautiful beard with satisfaction, and his face was full of smiles. The daughter of the Yi family had helped the Chu state retrieve a long-lost treasure. Moreover, she had brought the cloud-embracing sword as her dowry. What a great honor that would be! Yili sighed in her heart. After all, it is an item left behind by our ancestor. If we can't find it, we can just find a master swordsmith to forge another one. Then what about the military books? The treasures? Murong Ting asked in disappointment. Emo Xiaoyao looked at everyone indifferently. The cloud-embracing sword was forged when our ancestor was 16 years old. It cost all of our ancestors' savings. Where did the treasures and military books come from? Everyone was speechless. The people of the world only remembered that the cloud-embracing sword had followed Emo Lanyun his entire life. It was also the sword that every crown prince Ding carried with him. They guessed that there must be some secret behind it. However, they forgot that the cloud-embracing sword was forged by Emo Lanyun when he was young. At that time, Emo Lanyun was only a wild and unruly youth of an aristocratic family. Compared to the Prince Ding who helped his elder brother conquer the world 20 years later, he could not be mentioned in the same breath. Even Minister Yi, a scholar who did not know much about the cloud-embracing sword, could not help but be disappointed. If the cloud-embracing sword was so important, who would carry it with them? How could it be lost so easily? I'm going back first. Can you send a few more people over? Yili nodded. She took the cloud-embracing sword from Murong Ting's hands and threw it to Ajin. You should take the cloud-embracing sword back to the Ding King Palace. It's not convenient to leave it here. She had no interest in letting others step on her roof every day. Emo Xiaoyao nodded. It's good too. Seeing the cloud-embracing sword disappear outside the door, Murong Ting reluctantly withdrew her gaze. Emo Jingli stared at Yili suspiciously. You really believe that the cloud-embracing sword has no secrets? Yili naturally nodded. If I had military books and treasures, I wouldn't put them in a sword. As a commonly used sword that needed to be carried around, it was very famous and it was not a small sword. It was not a good thing to hide secrets. You vulgar people. That was Prince Ding's relic. Murong Ting resentfully despised the vulgar people in the hall. After Murong Ting despised the group of vulgar people, she held her hand that had touched Prince Ding's relic and admired herself. Minister Yi was in a happy mood as he greatly praised Yili. He could almost foresee what kind of reputation and glory it would bring to the Yi family when the news of Yili marrying the cloud-embracing sword was spread out. As for whether there were treasures or military books in the cloud-embracing sword, that was secondary. Minister Yi still had some self-awareness. Even if there were treasures, he would not have any part in it. In comparison, the reputation that did not need to pay any price at all was more meaningful. Chapter 80. Third sister is really fortunate. Prince Ding rushed over so quickly after hearing the news of heir Genom of Gojoseon's visit. It can be seen that he has deep feelings for third sister. Ying looked at Yili with her watery eyes and said faintly. Yili smiled faintly and said, Fourth sister and Prince Li are also deeply in love, aren't they? Yi Ying quickly glanced at Mo Jingli and lowered her head with an aggrieved expression. Seeing this, Minister Yi frowned slightly. Could it be that Ying was really wronged in Prince Li's residence? Thinking of this, Minister Yi casually looked at Mo Jingli and asked Yi Ying warmly, Ying, are you used to Prince Li's residence these days? Ying is doing well. Thank you for your concern, father. Yi Ying lowered her eyes and said softly. Minister Yi was relieved and smiled at Mo Jingli. Ying has been spoiled since she was young. If she has done anything wrong, Prince, please forgive her. Mo Jingli said, Father-in-law, don't worry. I will take good care of Ying. It's good. Li will be getting married in a few days. This year our Yi family can be said to have double happiness. Minister Yi smiled with satisfaction. The three people present had different expressions. Yi Li smiled faintly and nodded. Father is right. May 25 Li was pulled up early before dawn. Although she always went to bed early and woke up early looking at the dark night outside, Yi Li still felt a little helpless. The time to escort the bride was a little before noon, but she had to get up in the middle of the night to be manipulated. After taking a fragrant petal bath with the help of the maidservants, second aunt, first madam of Duquois residence, Qin Zheng's mother Madame Qin, and Aunt Yi who helped Yi Li prepare the dowry were already waiting in Qin Yi Pavilion with Murong Ting Hua Tianxiang Qin Zheng, and Qin Yu Ling Hua Tianxiang walked in with a smile on her face holding a phoenix brocade wedding dress. The glittering phoenix brocade made her delicate face even more beautiful. Congratulations. Looking at Yi Li with a smile, Hua Tianxiang smiled silently. Yi Li smiled faintly and raised her hand like a puppet, allowing the few people to help her put on the wedding dress. Under the candlelight, the noble phoenix flowed with the light, faintly discernible among the delicate peonies. Against the bright red wedding dress, Yi Li's beautiful face, which was usually a little pale, had a little more joy. So beautiful, worthy of the phoenix brocade. Murmuring softly, everyone was a little stunned. Madame Hua looked at Madame Su, who was looking at Yi Li with a gratified smile, and had a deeper understanding of third Miss Ye's position in the Su family. Patting her daughter who was in a daze, she said with a smile, Well, stand aside if you want to admire. Don't disturb us. Prince Ding will definitely be stunned. Yi Li shrugged and didn't say anything. If Mo Shuyao didn't like a beauty like noble consort Lu, it was hard to imagine what kind of beauty he would be stunned by. Qing Shuang and the others brought in some light breakfast. After eating and resting for a while, the madams came in again to choose accessories and makeup. Because they couldn't try on the wedding dress and couldn't have a second one, even the accessories, hairstyle, and makeup could only be decided according to the effect of the wedding dress after putting on the dress. So they prepared 3 sets of jewelry in advance. In the end, the madams unanimously chose a set of golden silk peonies with tassels inlaid with rubies and a few jeweled gold hairpins. Then they drew their eyebrows and put on some light rouge. Madame Qin ingeniously drew a small half-open peony between her eyebrows. Yi Li was a bit lost in thought as she looked at the beautiful woman in the bronze mirror. For a moment she almost didn't recognize herself. Her beautiful black hair was tied into an elegant bun. The tassels inlaid with gemstones swayed gently under the candlelight, adding a charm to the dignified and noble red wedding dress. Yi Li smiled faintly in her heart. She had never thought that the words charming and delicate would be related to her. So beautiful. Li, you're also stunned, aren't you? Hua Tianxiang teased. Yi Li glared at her. Madame Hua had already pushed the girls out with a smile. All right, everyone go out first. Let the bride rest for a while, the bridegroom should be here soon. The crowd once again congratulated Yi Li before leaving happily. Only Madame Su was left behind. When Madame Su handed her a thin booklet with a smile on her face and instructed her to read it carefully, Yi Li could only stare at the booklet in front of her in a daze. She didn't need to think to know what was inside. After thinking about it, Yi Li stood up and put the booklet in a box that she didn't use much. Chapter 81. King Ding's mansion was obviously much more reliable than King Li's mansion. Qin Yishuan was bustling with noise and excitement when it was only 9:15. Madame Hua and Madame Qin personally covered Yi Li's head with a phoenix brocade veil and helped her to pay her respects to old Madame Yi, Minister Yi and Madame Su's memorial tablets. In this wedding, the most eye-catching thing was naturally the groom, who was originally expected to appear, but absolutely unexpected. A long time ago, many people had secretly guessed who the king's mansion would invite to escort the bride, but no one thought that Prince Ding would come in person. The road from the gate of Ye's mansion to King Ding's mansion was already full of people in the capital who came to watch the fun. Seeing Prince Ding, who was dressed in red, appearing in front of everyone, the commoners couldn't help but recall the young man dressed in embroidered clothes who had galloped on his horse and brandished his whip. They sighed in their hearts. Similarly, the extravagance of Ye's mansion was also extraordinary. Originally, Yi Rong, the only son of the Yi family, should send his sister out, but it was completely different from when Ying got married. Outside the gate of Ye's mansion, 6 handsome and extraordinary men with different characteristics appeared. The leaders were naturally Su Qingchen and Su Qingze, followed by Su Qingfeng and Su Qingbai, and finally Su Qingyan and Yi Rong. The young masters of the Su family were either gentle and elegant, cold and dignified, valiant or handsome. Even the youngest, Su Qingyan, was smart and candid. Yi Rong was immediately ignored by everyone. She could only follow Su Qingyan silently. The bride walked out of the gate with the help of Hua Tianxiang and Qin Zheng. The phoenix brocade wedding dress shone brightly in the sun and attracted people's amazement again. This day was undoubtedly the busiest day in the capital. It was unknown whether it was because of the status of King Ding's mansion or because the guests who came to attend this wedding were too special. Even the emperor brought the empress and empress dowager to attend the wedding in person. They attended the wedding instead of presiding over the wedding, because the one presiding over the wedding this time was Great Elder Princess Shifu, who even the emperor had to respectfully address as Great Elder Princess. King Ding's mansion, which had not had any guests for 7 or 8 years, was full of guests. Great Elder Princess sat high on the throne and chatted with the guests who came to congratulate her. Mo Jingqi and the Empress sat beside Great Elder Princess and talked with her. Although Great Elder Princess had not been involved in worldly affairs for more than 20 years, her dignity as the iron-fisted princess, who was respected by the former emperor, was still not to be trifled with. Your Majesty, Great Elder Princess, the auspicious time has arrived. The chief steward of the Wang mansion came in to report, and all the guests in the hall fell silent. Mo Jingqi looked at the gray-haired Great Elder Princess, who was still in high spirits, and said with a smile, "In that case, salute me. Imperial Grandaunt?" Shifu Great Elder Princess nodded. She stood up and said to everyone, "Your Majesty, Empress Dowager, and all the guests, please come with I to watch the ceremony." The auditorium located in the main hall of the prince's mansion had already been properly decorated. Red candles burned high, creating a joyous atmosphere. Great Elder Princess sat high on the main seat, with the Emperor and Empress Dowager sitting on her left and right sides. The rest of the guests were seated according to their respective statuses. Under everyone's gaze, Mo Xiaoyao and Yi Li walked into the auditorium surrounded by bridesmaids. They were supposed to be a match made in heaven, but the groom could only sit in a wheelchair, which made many people feel sorry. At the same time, there were even more people who were sighing. If Prince Ding was not in his current state, he would have already married a talented and beautiful woman as his wife. Why would he only marry an unknown daughter from the minister's residence? Prince Ding's legs are inconvenient. Don't you lack sincerity by saluting like this? A joking voice suddenly sounded in the hall, as if a basin of ice water was suddenly poured into a blazing fire. The whole wedding hall suddenly fell silent. Everyone looked at the source of the voice in surprise. Sitting there were the envoys of various countries who came to watch the ceremony. Among them, a strong young man was staring at Mo Xiaoyao with a complacent face. Obviously, the words just now came from his mouth. He clearly did not feel that he was rude. When he saw everyone's gaze converging on him, he became even more presumptuous. "That is the 11th prince of the northern tribes. I heard that he is an idiot. Why would the king of the northern tribes send him to Dechu state?" Yi Li stood quietly beside Mo Xiaoyao, hearing the guests' whispers. "Have you forgotten that the northern tribes in King Ding's manor can be said to have a deep hatred as deep as the sea? Even though they have reconciled with our great Chu these few years, I'm afraid that they still hold a grudge over the past and purposely sent this idiot here to embarrass King Ding. How can the emperor allow such a person to attend the ceremony? He is the envoy of a country. He came from so far away, how can we not let him attend the ceremony?" Amidst the discussions, Mo Jingqi looked down and said to the prince of the northern tribes in a clear voice, "11th prince, Our Dechu state's wedding does not have a kneeling ceremony, so there is nothing inconvenient for Prince Ding. However, the prince of the northern tribes clearly did not intend to name the emperor of Dechu state. He furrowed his thick brows and said unhappily in a loud voice, I have heard of the reputation of the Dechu state's Prince Ding when I was in the northern tribes. Who would have thought that I would see a cripple in a wheelchair today? Is the Dechu state's emperor trying to fool us? When these words came out, not only Mo Jingqi but all the officials of the Dechu state present changed their expressions. Sitting beside the prince of the northern tribes, Lei Tingfeng, the crown prince of Shiling Genom of Gojoseon, coughed lightly and said with a smile, 11th prince, this is indeed the Dechu state's Prince Ding. However, Prince Ding met with an accident 7 years ago. Today we are here to attend the ceremony, not to make a scene. Come, let this prince toast you. The northern tribes were barbarians, and this 11th prince was considered a hooligan among them. How could he give up just because Lei Tingfeng urged him to drink? He glanced at Mo Shuyao and chuckled. I remember now. Prince Ding's injury seems to have been caused by our northern tribe's winged cavalry general. In the past, I always heard the winged cavalry general lamenting to I that he was so close to being captured. Enough. Princess Shifu was so angry that her face had turned black. She no longer cared that the prince of the northern tribes was an envoy from another country. She said coldly, if the prince of the northern tribes is here to attend the ceremony, then sit quietly. If not, get out. The prince of the northern tribes was stunned. He opened his mouth and wanted to say something to great elder princess. But he was quickly pressed back by the two people beside him. Although the prince of the northern tribes was displeased, he didn't say anything in the end. Others saw great elder princess's angry face and didn't dare to say anything. Mo Jingqi coughed softly and said, Princess, it's time to salute. Princess Shifu's eyes darkened and she nodded to the official who was in charge of the ceremony. First, bow to heaven and earth. Second, bow to your parents. Husband and wife, bow to each other. Under the red bridal veil, Yili slightly turned her eyes and saw the person beside her holding the red silk tightly. She could only sigh in her heart. In fact, since she knew Mo Shuyao until now, she always felt that Mo Shuyao was too perfect to be real. As a person who was crippled, disfigured and said to be in poor health, his performance was too perfect. He didn't feel inferior, nor did he feel sorry for himself, nor did he give up on himself. No matter when he stood up, even if he was sitting in a wheelchair, he seemed to be taller than anyone else. Thinking back to the rumor about the fiery young man, Mo Shuyao was even more illusory and ethereal. What kind of painful tempering did he have to go through from being as fiery as fire to being as gentle as jade? Until now, Yili really felt a trace of Mo Shuyao's emotions, anger and murderous intent. Chapter 82. Yili smiled bitterly. It was her wedding, but she could feel her husband's negative emotions in the hall. Even if it wasn't directed at her, it still made her feel a little depressed. The ceremony is complete. Send them to the bridal chamber. In the festive red bridal chamber, the dragon and phoenix candles burned quietly. Yili sat quietly on the new bed that was embroidered with dragons and phoenixes, speechless. She knew that Mo Shuyao was sitting not far from the bed and looking at her, but he didn't seem to have any intention of coming forward. Can I take this off? She couldn't wait for the groom to do it, so she could only ask herself. After a while, Mo Shuyao slowly walked forward. His eyes lit up as the veil on her head was removed. The two of them were stunned when they saw each other. Yili was used to Mo Shuyao's plain clothes, so she wasn't used to seeing him in a bright red robe. But this man didn't seem to be ugly no matter what color he wore. Mo Shuyao was only dazed for a moment. A trace of surprise flashed through his calm eyes, but it immediately disappeared without a trace. The two of them looked at each other in silence for a moment, feeling a little restrained. Yili leaned forward and pulled Mo Shuyao's left hand. Mo Shuyao was stunned and immediately wanted to pull back his clenched fist. Let go, Yili said lightly. His fingers gradually loosened. His broad hand didn't look like a pampered noble's. There were many calluses and scars on it, but it didn't look hideous. Yili remembered that one of her childhood friends had once told her what a man's hand should look like. There should be some calluses, which meant that this man wasn't someone who didn't do any household chores. There might even be 1 or 2 unsightly scars, which meant that this man wasn't someone who was raised in a boudoir. It would be best if it looked good. Only this kind of hand could make a woman feel safe and pleasing to the eye. At this moment the palm of his hand was stained with a shocking scarlet. 4 deep wounds were still slowly bleeding, but the man opposite her seemed to feel no pain at all. He opened his hand and allowed her to see. Yili lowered her head to look at his scarred palm. She reached out a finger and gently touched it. Then, she pressed down hard. She raised her head and looked at the man whose expression did not change at all. "Doesn't it hurt?" Emo Shuyao smiled faintly. He looked at Yili with a warm gaze. "What kind of pain is this? I've been through worse." Yili agreed. For someone who had been on the battlefield, this kind of injury was nothing. She stood up and walked to the side, rummaging through her dowry to find a familiar small box and carried it back. She sat by the bed and opened the box. She took out clean white cotton gauze and medicine and applied it on him. "Even if you're angry, you don't have to hurt yourself, right? I thought you were used to it." Emo Shuyao smiled bitterly. "You saw it. I'm not used to it yet." He also thought that he was used to it. In reality, he had used 7 whole years to get used to it. He was used to not being able to ride a horse and gallop on the battlefield. He was used to having to wear a mask in front of others. Otherwise, the scars on his face would attract fearful and sympathetic gazes. He was used to being seriously ill from time to time. His life in the past was like a dream. He always thought that he was used to it well. But today, standing in the hall and listening to the prince of the northern tribes humiliate him, he realized that he was still far from it. So today, not only did he humiliate himself, he also humiliated his new wife, even though his wife did not blame him. Yili clearly saw the guilt in the man's eyes and couldn't help but smile faintly. "I thought you knew that we would accept this marriage and I had already made preparations." Emo Shuyao asked, "You knew that this would happen?" Yili shook her head and smiled. "Even if this didn't happen, there would be other situations. Do you think I can expect to live a peaceful and happy life after getting married? Even a normal family would have its own problems, let alone a noble family like this." Emo Shuyao looked at her quietly. After a long time he said softly, "Maybe I can't guarantee that you will live a carefree life. But as long as it's me, I will do my best to give you the life you want." Yili raised her eyebrows. "I believe you." After applying the medicine, Yili put it away and smiled. "You've been tired. You should rest early." Emo Shuyao looked at Yili and said. Yili was stunned but soon smiled again. "Okay, you should also rest early." Emo Shuyao nodded and asked Jin to push him away. He thoughtfully asked Qing Shuang and others who were waiting outside to serve him. When Qing Shuang and others came in, Yili had taken off her jewelry and put it in the jewelry box on the dressing table. Qing Shuang frowned and said with some dissatisfaction, "Miss, why did Prince leave?" Princess Sifu, Great Elder Princess, said on the spot that Prince Ding was not allowed to disturb the bridal chamber and did not need Prince Ding to drink with the guests. So now Prince Ding should be in the bridal chamber with Mississippi. Why did he come and leave? Yili looked back and said with a smile, "This is the Prince Ding mansion. Are you afraid that he has no place to rest?" Qing Wan and Qing Yu prepared warm water and asked Yili to take a bath. Their expressions were not very good. Yili did not have time to care about whether the maid's expressions were good or not. In fact, in her opinion, Emo Shuyao's decision was too considerate. Although she did not intend to be his wife in name for the rest of her life, she was really worried about whether she could adapt to do something with a man she was not familiar with and had only met a few times. At this point she felt that she should admire the adaptability of ancient women. Usually she could not even hold hands with a man. When it came to marriage, she had to roll in the sheets with a man she had never met. Taking off the heavy jewelry and gorgeous wedding dress, Yili relaxed her body with satisfaction and prepared to take a bath and rest. Until she lay on the soft and comfortable bed and fell asleep, there was still a faint smile on her lips. "Mother, grandfather, father, mother and a large group of cousins, I married myself." Somewhere in the study room of the Ding King mansion, Emo Shuyao, who had already changed into plain clothes, sat behind the desk with a rarely seen gloomy and cold expression. Feng Jiao, who was dressed in red, lazily leaned against the door and said with a smile, "Why are you showing such an expression on the day of your wedding? Aren't you afraid of scaring sister-in-law?" In the corner of the room sat a hedonistic youth. He looked at him with a smile and said, "In my opinion, sister-in-law's courage is much bigger than what we imagined." Feng Jiao thought for a while and nodded in agreement. "That's right. I really haven't seen many women with the guts of third Miss Yi." "Have you said enough?" Emo Shuyao raised his head and looked coldly at the two people who were not serious. Feng Jiao shrugged his shoulders and said, "Tonight, that idiot is the 11th prince of the northern tribes, Yelu Ping. He is the son of the king of the northern tribe's most beloved concubine Xiao and the younger brother of the 7th prince of the northern tribes, Yelu Yi. He is also the nephew of the northern tribe's winged cavalry great general Helian Zhen. You can't have forgotten what you did to Helian Zhen 7 years ago, right? Helian Zhen's surname is Helian and concubine Zhao's surname is Xiao. How can Yelu Ping be Helian Zhen's nephew?" the hedonistic youth asked in confusion. Chapter 83. The relationship between the northern tribes is so messy that it gives people a headache. Who knows how they got involved? Feng Jiao said unhappily, "Leng Haoyu, shouldn't this be your problem?" The young man was the second son of the northern general Leng Haoyu, who was said to be the most disappointing person in the capital. "I received news from the northern tribes that Yelu Yi is Helian Zhen's illegitimate son. Can this kind of news that has already spread to Dechu State be trusted?" Feng Jiao rolled his eyes and looked back at Emo Shuyao. 7 years ago, your eldest brother suddenly died of illness. Originally, Helian Zhen could have taken the opportunity to establish unparalleled achievements and even sweep through Dechu State. In the end, because you killed your way out of Ghost Sorrow Valley, a fire almost burned half of Helian Zhen's life. Not only did Helian Zhen lose soldiers, but the northern tribes also didn't dare to send troops for 3 whole years. By the time they recover, our great Chu will have recovered as well. From then on, Helian Zhen fell out of favor with the king of the northern tribes. This also caused Yelu Yi and concubine Zhao's influence in the northern tribes to be greatly reduced. It's already good that they didn't directly rush to Dechu State to fight with you. Emo Shuyao said indifferently, "In other words, Yelu Ping was sent by Yelu Yi to embarrass I?" Feng Jiao rubbed his chin and said, "Everyone knows that Yelu Ping is a hooligan. He offended you and you were too embarrassed to argue with him. Isn't the result obvious?" Emo Shuyao sneered, "Today they are still considered polite. Only Yelu Ping jumped out to cause trouble. The others are also impatient, right?" Feng Jiao knocked his forehead and thought for a while. Who knew that our emperor would bring the empress and empress dowager to Ding King's estate? It's not good to be too rude in front of his majesty, right? Since a fool has already stepped out, those who claim to be smart naturally won't speak anymore. However, the envoys from each country will stay in the capital for half a month. As for sister-in-law, don't disturb her, Emo Shuyao said calmly. Feng Jiao and Leng Haoyu looked at each other. Leng Haoyu blinked his peach blossom eyes and asked, "Prince, don't tell us that the new princess you married is planning to hide her in the Prince Ding mansion and not let anyone see her? Could it be that the third miss of the Yi family was so charming that His Highness Prince Ding fell in love with her at first sight and wanted to carefully hide and protect her when they met again?" Emo Shuyao said, "Miss Li doesn't like to socialize with the rich and powerful. If there's nothing important, don't bother her." Feng Jiao tapped the folding fan in his hand and frowned. "Ayao, even if an ordinary family marries a wife, they have to take charge of the inner court and make connections. If it was the hairstyle popular among the noble ladies in the capital, you wouldn't be able to stand it. In the past, those hairstyles were for young ladies. Now that you're married, you can't use them anymore. Let's use the set of jewelry that Prince gave young Miss before." "Young Miss hasn't used it yet." Yi Li nodded. She did like that set of green magnolia jewelry very much. It didn't look too ostentatious. Qing Xia pressed her lips together with a smile. She took Yi Li's jewelry and helped Yi Li put it on. She nodded and praised. "Qing Shuang understands young Miss the best." "What young Miss?" Lin Mama and Wei Mama came in. Lin Mama glared at the servant girls and said, "From now on, you have to call her Wang Fei. Don't let the people in this fu think that the Wang Fei's servants don't know the rules." "Yes, Mama." The 4 maidservants greet the princess. The 4 maidservants stood in a row and respectfully bowed to Yi Li. Wei Mama's heart ached for Yi Li as she asked in a soft voice. The 2 Mama naturally knew that Prince hadn't rested in the bridal chamber last night. Wei Mama couldn't help but feel sorry for the young miss that she had taken care of since she was young. Yi Li smiled and comforted the 2 Mama. The 2 Mama saw that Yi Li's face didn't have any expression of being wronged and dropped the matter. They thought that young Miss had just arrived at the Ding King's fu and was not used to it yet. Prince was considerate, so he gave young Miss some time to adapt. But they still hinted to Yi Li that it was best for her to become a real husband and wife with Prince as soon as possible. After all, they were people who would spend a lifetime together. Yi Li's mouth couldn't help but twitch. In the end, she didn't say anything and let them misunderstand. Prince is here. Emo Xiuyao appeared outside the door and asked softly, Yi Li, may I come in? Yi Li responded. Emo Xiuyao then left a Jing outside the door and slid his wheelchair in. Looking at Yi Li, he asked, Yi Li, did you sleep well last night? Yi Li nodded with a smile. Very well. Your complexion doesn't look too good? When Emo Xiuyao came in, Lin Mama led the servant girls out. Yi Li regained her senses and found that there was no one to serve tea. She could only helplessly smile at Emo Xiuyao as she walked to the table and sat down. Emo Xiuyao's eyes did indeed have some tiredness as he waved his hand. Last night I sent some guests to rest a little late. It's not a problem. Chapter 84. Should we greet Great Elder Princess first? An eldest sister-in-law. Emo Xiuyao was the only direct descendant in Prince Ding's mansion, but there were other people. The late Prince Ding, who was also Emo Xiuyao's elder brother, Emo Xiuan's first wife, was still alive. However, it was said that she had been staying in the temple all year round for her husband's sake. She didn't even appear at the wedding yesterday. One of the concubines of Emo Xiuyao's father, Emo Lufeng, was also alive. In addition, Yi Li didn't ask how many concubines Emo Xiuyao had. Emo Xiuyao shook his head and said, let's have breakfast first. Great Elder Princess is old and tired yesterday, so she won't get up so early. As for eldest sister-in-law, Emo Xiuyao frowned slightly and said, since eldest brother passed away, eldest sister-in-law has been living in the Buddha Hall with several concubines. Even I rarely see her. A few days ago she sent someone to tell you that you can visit her when you come back. Yi Li nodded. She had heard about the former Princess Ding from her third brother. He was also a pitiful person. Princess Wen wasn't born in a rich and powerful family, but in an ordinary scholarly family. She married Emo Xiuan when she was 16 and lost her husband when she was 18. Emo Xiuan was away on an expedition when they just got married, so they didn't even have a child. Then, what do I need to do? Yi Li asked. Emo Xiuyao looked at her and said with a faint smile, besides managing the affairs in the mansion, you also need to keep some accounts. You can do whatever you like at other times. If you feel bored, you can invite your friends to visit the mansion or go out for a walk. Li, this will be your home in the future, so you don't have to be so restrained. Yi Li nodded and said, I know, but I'm not used to it. So now, let's have breakfast first. Then I'll bring you to meet the people in the mansion. Breakfast was served in Yi Li's courtyard. The breakfast served in the Prince Ding mansion was also to Yi Li's liking. After breakfast, the head steward came in to report, Prince, the stewards are all here. I await the summons of the prince and princess consort. Emo Xiuyao nodded and turned around to say to Yi Li, this is the butler of the Prince Ding mansion, Emo Exit. He's also Ah Jin's uncle. If you need anything in the future, just tell him directly. The steward also stepped forward and bowed. This old servant greets the princess. Yi Li smiled faintly and said, you don't have to be so courteous. I'll have to trouble you in the future. It could be seen that Emo Xiuyao valued this steward a lot, and he was also Ah Jin's uncle. Ah Jin was always by Emo Xiuyao's side, and could definitely be considered a trusted aide. Receiving such courteous treatment from the princess, Steward Emo wasn't shocked, but he wasn't arrogant. He still respectfully returned the greeting, this old servant doesn't dare. If the princess has any orders in the future, just tell this old servant. When the procession came to the flower hall, there were already many people standing there. Seeing Yi Li and Emo Xiuyao come in, they instantly stood up and bowed in unison. Greetings to the prince, greetings to the princess. Emo Xiuyao pulled Yi Li into the flower hall. He pointed at the main seat for her to sit before turning back to say, rise. This is the newly married princess. In the future, princess consort's words are I's thoughts. Does everyone understand? We will follow princess consort's orders. Very good. Li, this is Sun Mama. She's the steward of the Wang Fu. She's in charge of all matters in the Fu. If you have anything you don't understand, you can ask her. The mama standing at the very front was Sun Mama, who had come to the Yi Fu to deliver gifts. She was also the first person that Emo Xiuyao had introduced to Yi Li. Thinking, Emo Xiuyao added, Sun Mama used to be one of Mu Fei's people. This old servant greets princess consort. Sun Mama greets princess consort. Yili nodded. This is the external steward of the Wang Fu Yongling. He's in charge of all external interactions. Standing next to Sun Mama was a middle-aged man in his 40s. His eyes were slightly bright. One could see that he was a very scheming person. Yongling greets princess consort. Yili frowned slightly. She didn't have any opinion on how other people addressed themselves. But it was often possible to see a person's attitude towards you from how they addressed themselves. This external steward clearly didn't have as much respect for Yili as Steward Mo and Sun Mama did for Yili. Steward Yang doesn't need to be so courteous. Then Mo Shuyao introduced to Yili several stewards who were in charge of the various businesses in the Wang Fu, as well as several more important stewards. Yili also had people send greeting gifts for these stewards and rewards for the servants in the Fu. Sun Mama and Steward Mo's admiration for this new princess consort grew stronger. Although the Yi family wasn't very proper, it was clear that the new princess consort had inherited Madame Ye's excellent bloodline. She knew when to advance and when to retreat. Even the gifts given to the stewards and the rewards given to the servants were carefully arranged and very appropriate. Princess consort. Ajin appeared at the door. Looking at the people in the flower pavilion, he hesitated before speaking. Yin, what is it? Mo Shuyao asked. Ajin held a long box in his hands and said, someone just sent this over, saying it's a wedding gift for princess consort. Yili raised an eyebrow. Where is the person? Gone. The two exchanged a look. Mo Shuyao then said to Ajin, bring it over. Mo Shuyao took it in his hands and looked. When he opened the box, there was only a scroll painting inside. Seeing that there was no problem, he handed it to Yili. Yili lowered her head to unfold the painting and couldn't help but gasp in surprise. This was a painting of a beautiful woman. Those who had never seen the painting would find it hard to imagine that there was such a beauty in the world. Her willowy eyebrows were dark without any makeup. Her cherry lips were vermilion without any painting. Her exquisite and refined features were described with any compliments that made people feel like they had tarnished her. Even in the painting, one could still feel the clear water in the eyes of the young girl in the painting. The young girl in the painting was dressed in plain clothing, her hands holding a zither as she smiled amidst the flowers. Even the flowers seemed to lose their color. Bright as the sun rising at dawn, as bright as the lotus blooming. Such a great beauty. Yili sighed softly. Her gaze moved to the side of the painting. On it was written, Beauty of the Chu Capital. The inscription was Han Mingyue. Mo Shuyao also stilled. Looking at the beautiful woman in the painting, his eyes moved slightly. He quickly turned his gaze to Yili. Yili was silent for a moment. She raised her head and smiled at Mo Shuyao. Han Mingyue's beauty is said to be worth thousands of gold. But to send such a painting to me on the second day of the wedding, I feel ashamed. Mo Shuyao smiled faintly. He looked at her and said, you are very good. Yili looked at the woman in the painting one last time. She rolled up the painting and said with some difficulty, this? Although the painting was very beautiful and very valuable, keeping it by her side was not a good idea. Even if she wasn't jealous, she didn't feel that she should keep the painting of her husband's ex-fiancé. Mo Shuyao said, it's for you. Yili can deal with it herself. Yili raised her eyebrows. Did he think that she would force him to deal with the painting of his ex-fiancé? She only wanted to ask him if he wanted it. If he wanted it, she would give it to him. I don't have much interest in painting. Moreover, looking at a woman who is prettier than me every day is a blow to me. Mo Shuyao thought for a moment. He said to Nurse Sun, change the box and bring this painting to old Sue's residence. Chapter 85. Nanny Sun said respectfully, yes, Your Highness. She stepped forward to take over the painting in Yili's hand and turned around to hand it to the maid beside her to prepare. Mo Shuyao tilted his head and said to Yili with a smile, let's go. Great elder princess should get up. Yili nodded, got up and held Mo Shuyao's hand to leave with him. She didn't see the gratified look on Nanny Sun's and Director Mo's faces behind her. Who do you think sent that painting to her? Yili asked curiously as they walked to the courtyard where Great Elder Princess lived temporarily. Mo Shuyao shook his head and said, that painting was originally kept in the mansion. I wanted to give it to Elder Su. But there were too many things to deal with at that time. When I came back, I didn't know where it was. Yili said with a smile, Han Mingyue's painting is priceless. Didn't you send someone to look for it? What's more, it's a real beauty. No wonder Han Mingyue dared to paint Chu Jing as a beauty. Mo Shuyao looked up at her and said after thinking for a moment, if you must paint, my painting is not worse than Han Mingyue's. Or I can paint one for you when I'm free. Yili was stunned for a moment and couldn't help but smile. Hey, thank you very much. Great Elder Princess had got up. As soon as they reached the door, the maid beside Great Elder Princess invited them in. Great Elder Princess was sitting on the couch and drinking tea. When she saw them come in, she immediately smiled and waved to Mo Shuyao. Shuyao, come here and let me have a look at you. And Shuyao's wife, come here, come here. Mo Shuyao took Yili forward and saluted. Imperial Aunt. Great Elder Princess pulled Yili to sit beside her. After looking at her carefully, she nodded with satisfaction and said, good, good, good. You are a good daughter-in-law of King Ding's mansion. I like you very much. The emperor finally did a good thing this time. Shuyao should live a good life with Lear. I won't teach you a lesson if you dare to mess around and make Lear angry. Mo Shuyao didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He said with a wry smile, Imperial Aunt. Yili gloated at his rare embarrassment. She covered her mouth and snickered. Great Elder Princess held Yili's hand affectionately and said, Lear, you don't know how naughty he was when he was a child. If he wasn't obedient for a day, he would go up the roof and tear down the tiles. His lord father was so angry that he almost fainted. She had become much more mature in the past few years. She had grown up and become more sensible. You two have a good life together. If you have any grievances, feel free to look for I. I will help you. Great Elder Princess was surprisingly easy to get along with. Perhaps because she was old and liked children, Great Elder Princess didn't look like the legendary iron-fisted princess at all. Instead, she was more like an amiable grandmother than Madame Dowager of the Yi family. Yili smiled and said, thank you, Imperial Aunt. Shuyao won't bully me. Hearing Yili's address, Great Elder Princess's eyes lit up and she was obviously happier. She held Yili's hand and talked about Mo Shuyao's embarrassing childhood. Mo Shuyao sat there with the corners of his mouth twitching, which was rare. He didn't know whether to stop her or leave. He could only sit there and listen to Great Elder Princess talking about his childhood and accept Yili's strange and teasing gaze. Great Elder Princess obviously didn't care about Mo Shuyao's feelings or Yili's feelings. She even directly talked about Mo Shuyao's childhood sweetheart, Su Yudi. Yili felt a little embarrassed, but seeing that Mo Shuyao didn't mean to stop Great Elder Princess, she had to listen for the time being. Great Elder Princess didn't seem to see the expressions of the two young people in front of her. She held Yili's hand and said to Mo Shuyao with a smile, I have said that the girl of the Su family is not suitable for you. Now look at Lear. You have to admit that I have a better taste than you. Don't you think so? Imperial Aunt. Mo Shuyao smiled bitterly. Imperial Aunt, I have to take Li Li to pay respects to my father and mother. Do you have time to talk to Li Li in private? Great Elder Princess lowered her head and thought for a while. Finally she said, you're right. Go and pour tea for your father and mother first. It's the right thing to write Li-er into the genealogy. I will go back in a while. Li-er, don't forget to come and see I later. Yili said with a smile, can't Imperial Aunt stay for a few more days? Great Elder Princess sighed and said, I'm old and I'm not used to going out. After you get married you can go to I's place to live more often. Since Great Elder Princess said so, the two of them naturally couldn't stay any longer. Mo Shuyao took Yili to burn incense to the ancestors of the Prince Ding mansion, accompanied Great Elder Princess to have lunch, and then personally sent Great Elder Princess out of King Ding's mansion. In the afternoon, Mo Shuyao went to the study by himself. Yili also had a lot of things to deal with, so she went back to her courtyard. Looking at King Ding's mansion, which had recovered its tranquility, Yili only felt a little like a dream. In just one day she had moved from Ye's mansion to King Ding's mansion, got married and became King Ding's consort. And it seemed that she had been completely used to it. Because she had just gotten married, the stewards of King Ding's mansion naturally wouldn't be so tactless as to immediately bother her with a lot of trivial account books. So Yili just needed to take care of the people in her courtyard and the dowry. Back to the courtyard, Nanny Sun was waiting there to chat with Nanny Lin and Nanny Wei. When she saw Yili come in, she hurriedly stepped forward to salute, Princess. Yili said with a smile, Nanny's son is an old servant of my mother and a trusted person of Prince. You don't have to be so polite. Nanny's son said a little cautiously, thank you for your kindness, Princess. I dare not overstep my boundaries. I followed the prince's instructions and chose some people to serve Princess. Princess, if you like them, you can keep them by your side. After she finished speaking, she took out a list from her sleeve and presented it. On the list, it was the people who had been assigned to Yi Li's courtyard. Nanny's son continued, there should be 4 maidservants serving Princess. In addition, there should be 2 maidservants who take care of Princess's clothing and food. There should also be 4 maidservants for sewing. There should also be 8 second-ranked maidservants serving in the courtyard. There should also be 16 little maidservants who do rough work. These second-ranked maidservants and little maidservants should be handed over to Princess's 2 nannies to handle. But the maidservants who take care of the clothing and food should be personally looked over by Princess. While she was speaking, several maidservants dressed as maidservants walked in and respectfully saluted Yi Li. Greetings to Princess. Yi Li lowered her head to look at the guts that Nanny's son had sent over. Not only did the names and ages of these maidservants were written clearly on it, there was also their family background and who was in their family. And they were all children of the Ding Wangfu's servants. Yi Li nodded and handed one of the guts to Lin Nanny and Wei Nanny to let them take care of the second and third-ranked maidservants. She turned back and smiled at Nanny's son. I naturally have confidence in the people that Nanny's son has chosen. She casually picked out a few people from the list. The maidservants who had been picked quickly came out to give their thanks. Yi Li ordered Qing Shuang to take out a number of pouches filled with silver coins and rewarded each of them with one. After taking care of the maidservants, Yi Li invited Nanny's son to sit down and talk. As expected, she did as Zemo Shuyao had said. She spoke without hiding anything. Yi Li hesitated for a while before asking, Nanny's son, the Wang Fu, other than Dassault, are there any other women folk? Sun Mama was startled for a moment, but she quickly understood what Yi Li meant. Smiling, she said, replying to the princess, other than the eldest madam and the 2 concubines serving her, there are no other women in the house. Yi Li looked gloomily at Nanny's son, who was smiling strangely. She nodded to show that she understood. Emo Shuyao didn't have any other concubines. This was very good. At least it meant that there was less trouble for her to deal with. Not thinking about the troubles that she could encounter in the future, Yi Li found that the days in the Ding Wangfu were as perfect as she had imagined in the beginning. Husband and wife lived in harmony and didn't interfere with each other's private matters. There were no elders to worry about in the morning and at night, no sisters-in-law to chat with, there wasn't even a jealous concubine. If this kind of life continued to be peaceful like this, she would be grateful to Mo Jingli for breaking off the engagement and the meddlesome emperor for granting the marriage. Chapter 86. Prince. Ajin looked strangely at Mo Shuyao, who was staring at the book. Ajin had followed the prince since childhood. Even though he was slow, he could tell when the prince was thinking and when he was lost in thought. Mo Shuyao's eyes flashed and he raised his head to look at him. Is something the matter? Ajin rubbed the back of his head with some annoyance and said, Prince, do you want to go see Wang Fei? Mo Shuyao casually put the book back on the table. Looking at Ajin's uneasy state, he smiled faintly and said, Did Chief Steward Mo tell you to ask, or did you ask Nurse Sun? Ajin's eyes widened. Uncle and Nurse Sun had both mentioned that he should mention Wang Fei in front of the prince and find a chance for the prince and Wang Fei to spend more time together. But he didn't know how to find a chance. So when he saw the prince in a daze, which was rare, he thought that since he had nothing to do, he could ask the prince if he wanted to go see Wang Fei, right? Looking at Ajin's puzzled state, Mo Shuyao shook his head and said with a smile, All right, don't think about it. What is Li doing right now? She seems to be organizing the things she brought from the Yi family. Then don't go now. Let's wait until she forgets. Where are the guests from last night? A hint of annoyance flashed through Ajin's eyes. He said, They're still in the dungeon. Let's go see. In the dark dungeon, the flickering light of the fire projected the shadows of the people in the room onto the walls, swaying slightly with the light. It made the already gloomy dungeon even more mysterious. Feng Jiao was still dressed in his arrogant and grand red brocade robe. He lazily lay on the only chair in the dungeon and listened with satisfaction to the endless wails. Compared to the boredom of the past few years, He was very satisfied with the busy days of the past few days. Speak, why did you break into the Prince Ding mansion at night? In the center of the room, a black-clothed man was chained to a rack. His body was already riddled with scars, and he was glaring fiercely at him. Feng Jiao, you're Prince Ding's man. Oh? You know me? Looks like you're from Dechu State? Feng Jiao blinked his almond-shaped eyes. His interest was piqued. He sat up straight and looked at the person in front of him. Where did you come from? In the palace. Is our emperor still the one from Zhangde Palace? Or which mansion did you come from? Humph. Half of the men of sacrifice were unyielding. Torture had not been able to make him confess. Naturally, Feng Jiao would not be able to make him talk with just a few words. Feng Jiao narrowed his eyes in displeasure. This young master wants to see if your bones are harder than this young master's torture tool. Continue. Swish. The ferocious barbed whip continued to create more scars on the man's body. Feng Jiao stared gloomily at the scene in front of him. The sound of the wheelchair turning came from afar. Feng Jiao turned around and saw Emo Shuyao walking towards him. He stood up and smiled. Why are you here at this time instead of accompanying the bride? Emo Shuyao did not answer. He raised his eyebrows and looked at him. Confessed. Feng Jiao helplessly pulled over the file that was placed at the side. Last night we caught 4 groups of 7 people. One of them was from the northern tribes, one from the southern Zhao. 2 of them wanted to take advantage of the situation and 3 of them refused to confess. The one from the northern tribes wanted to snatch the bride and make the Ding mansion look bad. The one from the southern Zhao only wanted to scout the terrain to see if there was a chance to get the cloud-embracing sword. The other 2 wanted to take the opportunity to steal something. As for this one, he was the first to be caught and also the one with the best martial arts. I suspect that he's here to assassinate, but the target of the assassination is unknown. He shouldn't be here to assassinate you. When Emo Shuyao accompanied the bride back to the bridal chamber, this fellow was ambushed at the banquet area and was caught by the secret guards. So the target of the assassination should definitely be one of the guests present. Someone from the Dechu State? Emo Shuyao turned to the hanging man in black and asked. Feng Jiao rubbed his chin. He knows me. He must be someone from the Dechu State. Young Master Feng San was very famous, but it was only limited to the Dechu State and it was only limited to the capital. After all, a dandy young master who was expelled from the Feng family and did not have the right to inherit would not attract the interest of outsiders. Continue. If you can't get anything out of him, just kill him. Emo Shuyao said lightly. Where is Yelu Ping? Feng Jiao gestured towards the room beside him and ignored Emo Shuyao. Instead, he stared at the black-clothed man in front of him with interest and laughed. The black-clothed man instinctively felt cold. He obviously knew that if he was caught there was no way out. However, when he heard Prince Ding casually say to kill him if he couldn't get anything out of him, as if he was saying that the weather was good today, his heart couldn't help but tremble. Prince Ding was definitely not a crippled and useless piece of trash like what outsiders thought. Feng Jiao looked at him with a smile. Actually, to this young master, it doesn't matter if you talk or not. You're going to die anyway, right? If you talk, this young master will give you a quick death. It's fine if you don't talk. You can try out this young master's new toy. These 2 years have been boring to death. A trace of fear flashed through the man's eyes, but he still refused to talk. Feng Jiao didn't mind. He waved his hand and signaled for the people beside him to do it. Then he swaggered towards Emo Shuyao's room. The other room was obviously much more comfortable than the previous one. At least the entire room was dry and quiet. There wasn't any smell or blood. There was only a metal fence that divided the entire room into 2 halves. The prince of the northern tribes, who was still spouting nonsense last night, was now on the other side of the fence. He grabbed onto the fence and glared at Emo Shuyao. Emo Shuyao, you cripple. How dare you send people to capture I thought that the prince of the northern tribes had entered a place that he shouldn't have and was captured by Emo Shuyao looked at him with a warm and cold smile. However, the prince of the northern tribes can rest assured. Even if it's because of the diplomatic relations between our 2 countries, I will definitely not harm the prince. Meeting his cold gaze, Yelu Ping couldn't help but tremble. He grabbed onto the fence and shook it even more angrily. Won't harm I? Then why did you lock I up here? I will definitely report this to your emperor. I'll chop off your head. Emo Shuyao's lips curled. There are some urgent matters in the northern tribes. In fact, the northern tribe's envoy had already sent a letter to His Majesty to bid farewell. He left the capital in the morning. Yelu Ping was stunned. How is that possible? I still here, who dares to leave? The prince of the northern tribes need not worry about not being able to return to your country. Later I will personally send someone to send you back to the northern tribes. Hand it over to the crown prince. Hearing this, Yelu Ping's expression turned ugly. He was a bit of a hooligan, but he wasn't a fool. The crown prince didn't get along with his brother Yelu Yi. The two of them had been fighting for many years. If he landed in the crown prince's hands, then seventh brother would definitely kill him. Emo Shuyao, you despicable person. My seventh brother won't let you off. Emo Shuyao laughed coldly. He raised his head and stared at him. Yelu Yi dared to send you to provoke I, so he should be mentally prepared to make sure that you won't be able to return. Or what happened yesterday was the king of the northern tribe's idea. Then it seems like he doesn't really want you as his son? Yelu Ping seemed to have thought of something and his face turned pale. He glared fiercely at Emo Shuyao. You're talking nonsense. Seventh brother would never do that. His tone was obviously lacking in confidence. He was stupid, but he wasn't stupid. He had been mocked since he was young. Even his seventh brother often scolded him for being stupid. Even his father didn't like him. Could it be that? Chapter 87. Emo Shuyao's eyes flashed darkly as he looked at the person in front of him. He no longer looked as smug as he did yesterday. If he could, he would definitely make this prince of the northern tribes die without a complete corpse. Even his bones and ashes would not be enough to quench the hatred in his heart. Unfortunately, this idiot was the prince of the northern tribes and could not die just yet. Just like those people outside, no matter how much he disliked them, no matter how much he hated them, he had to temporarily let them live. Too lazy to look at the person in front of him, Emo Shuyao turned and walked out of the prison. Feng Jiao was leaning against the wall and looking at him with a grin. You really intend to hand this idiot over to the prince of the northern tribes? Emo Shuyao raised an eyebrow and said, just this idiot is not enough. I don't care what method you use to make him spit out everything he knows in 10 days. See if there is anything useful to hand over to Yelu Hong. No matter what method. That's right, no matter what method. I just want an answer. No matter how stupid he is still Yelu Ye's younger brother. I don't believe that he doesn't know anything. Emo Shuyao said in a low voice, you know what to do after this. Feng Jiao nodded, the smile on his face widening. I understand. He is already pretty stupid. It wouldn't be a surprise if he became even more stupid. Isn't that right? Let Yelu Ping and Yelu Yi fight each other like dogs? I like this idea. Emo Shuyao nodded in satisfaction. I'll leave it to you. Take care, Your Highness. Enjoy your new marriage. Seeing Emo Shuyao and Ajing's figures disappear through the prison door, Feng Jiao narrowed his eyes in satisfaction as he looked at the eerie prison in front of him. He could also hear faint pleas for mercy. The smile on his face became even more radiant. What a bunch of idiots. Of all people to provoke, they had to provoke Emo Shuyao? Emo Shuyao had never been kind since he was 3 years old. Ever since that incident, even his heart had turned black. Reporting to Wang Fei, concubine dowager is here. In the study, Yili was sorting out the account books she had brought from the Yi residence when a servant girl came in to report. Yili raised her head and was stunned to see the servant girl standing at the door. Qing Shuang had already opened her mouth and said, Jingwen, why are you here? This servant girl was the one who was sent to the sewing room by Yili when she was in the Yi residence. Her original name was Han Qing Jingwen. The maids in King Ding's residence were all dressed in a moon-white robe with a plain-colored belt. This kind of simple yet elegant robe made her look a little flirtatious. Jingwen looked with alarm at Yili and said in a low voice, the mama in charge said that the clothes made by Jingwen's embroidery skills are not suitable for Wang Fei to wear. There are 4 first-rate embroiderers in the sewing room, so Jingwen was sent outside to serve. Although she was very happy to be able to leave the sewing room, a trace of shame flashed across Jingwen's face when her embroidery skills were found to be worthless. Yili faintly scolded this girl in her heart. This girl had stayed in the sewing room for a month or 2 and still didn't learn to be smarter. Did she think that she didn't have to worry about anything just because she had a good appearance? Alright, you can leave first. Ask concubine dowager to come in. Yili waved her hand. Yes, princess consort. Jing Wen bowed and respectfully retreated. Qing Shuang complained in dissatisfaction. Why did Lin Mama and Wei Mama bring her to young miss? She doesn't look like someone who knows her place. Qing Wan and Qing Yu came later and weren't familiar with Jing Wen, who had stayed in the sewing room. They only felt that she was too enchanting. Hearing Qing Shuang's words, they immediately looked over. Qing Shuang stomped her feet in annoyance. It's all my fault. I actually forgot to tell Lin Mama. Qing Xia smiled faintly. Alright Qing Shuang, Lin Mama is an old mama who followed Furin. Do you think she can't see what kind of person Jing Wen is? What's more, she's just a second-class girl who serves outside. Yun and Cui can't be compared to her. Ding Wangfu is unfamiliar with the people and the place, so she can't do anything. Yili put down the book and smiled. Qing Shuang, you still have to learn more from Qing Xia. Don't be rash about everything. Qing Shuang stuck out her tongue. Yes, I will follow Wang Fei's order. As soon as she stepped into the reception hall, Yili was stunned. A middle-aged woman in her 50s was sitting on the main seat. She was wearing a gorgeous brocade robe and a head ornament with gold and jade inlaid with gems. She looked very noble. If she didn't know her identity beforehand, Yili would have thought that she wasn't the old Prince Ding's Sufei, but the Di Fei. At this time, side grand concubine was leaning against the chair and resting with her eyes closed. There were two maidservants standing behind her. One had her shoulders lowered and the other was gently fanning herself with a palace fan. Yili couldn't help but want to laugh. It wasn't even June yet. The weather in the Chu capital wasn't hot. Wasn't she afraid of catching a cold from the fan? When everyone saw Yili come in, they quickly stood up and bowed. You can leave. I've made side grand concubine wait for a long time. Yili waved her hand to let them leave. She frowned and walked to the other side to sit down. Young side grand concubine slowly opened her eyes and looked at Yili with a picky face. Yili had a smile on her lips and allowed her to size her up. She turned her gaze to a white-clothed young girl sitting below. That young girl seemed to be very timid. When she met Yili's gaze, she immediately shrank back and avoided her in a panic. Side grand concubine has come. Is there a matter? Yili looked away and turned to side grand concubine. Young side grand concubine narrowed her eyes in displeasure. It was clear that she was no longer in her prime and her face darkened. She gave a light snort and said, Wang Fei is too arrogant. You don't know how to greet your elders after passing through the door. This dowager could only come and greet Wang Fei. Yili understood. So she had come to find trouble. She frowned with some trouble and looked at side grand concubine with a faint smile. Then this Fei has been rude. But this Fei asked Prince yesterday. The prince only said that he needed to go and greet De Saw after returning home. He didn't mention that there was anyone else in the Wang Fu that this Fei needs to personally greet. Yang side grand concubine's expression froze. It took a while before she recovered. She looked at Yili and said, Prince hasn't been in a good mood these years. It's hard to avoid oversights. It's fine if you don't remind him as a Wang Fei, but you dare to be so rude. Remind? Emo Shuyao didn't even mention you. It's obvious that he doesn't want to see you. I only reminded him because I ate too much. Long before she got married, Yili had already memorized the identities of the members of the Ding King's Fu. For example, the Yang side concubine in front of her. Her identity was really special. Not only was she the only side concubine of the old Prince Ding Emo Lufeng, she was also the aunt of Emo Shuyao and Emo Xuan. She was also the sister of the former Princess Ding. But this identity didn't make her more respected in the Ding King's Fu. In fact, no matter if it was when Emo Lufeng was alive or Emo Xuan or now Emo Shuyao, they all treated her as heir and ignored her. Yang side grand concubine wasn't even 50 years old this year. She was about the same age as Xiao Yang, eldest princess. But for two women who were widowed at the same time, one would think that they were at least 10 years apart just by looking at their appearance. But Yili wouldn't sympathize with her because of this. She could only say that she asked for it. Yang side grand concubine married into the Ding King's Fu when the former Princess Ding gave birth to Emo Xuan. After giving birth to Emo Xuan, Princess Ding's health became very poor. Her originally loving relationship with Prince Ding also became somewhat cold. Then 7 years later she passed away not long after giving birth to Emo Shuyao. And compared to Emo Xuyao's disregard for side grand concubine, the usually gentle and refined Emo Xuan's attitude towards her could be said to be one of disgust. Therefore Yili had enough reason to think that side grand concubine used some unconventional method to marry into the Ding King's fu and directly caused the relationship between Mo Lufeng and Wang Fei to break. Even if she didn't talk about all of this, even if Mo Xiuyao would take in a concubine in the future, she would definitely not accept anyone from Yi Shan or Yi Lin. If it was said that she found it hard to accept sharing a husband with others, sharing a husband with her biological sister was simply challenging the limits of her tolerance. Chapter 88. I really don't know if there is a need for me to personally pay my respects to a secondary consort, Yili said faintly with her clear eyes half closed. How dare you? Secondary consort Yang was so angry that her face turned red and she pointed at Yili without saying a word. The identity of a secondary consort was the pain of her life. When she married into the prince's residence, she was already a secondary consort and she was not disappointed as she was born from a concubine. After her sister died, she thought that she had the chance to become the main consort because the prince only had her as his secondary consort. However, the prince did not even look at her until he died. Ever since Mo Lufeng passed away, she knew that she would never have the chance. Until she died, she could only be a secondary consort and she could not even be buried with Mo Lufeng. The prince's residence's consort Yang should know who is the one who is being impudent. Yili raised her head and stared at her faintly. The Ding King's residence respected the prince on the outside and the princess consort on the inside. Not to mention a mere secondary consort, even the proper consort Yang could not embarrass the princess consort. So after Mo Xiuwen passed away, the servants no longer addressed princess consort when as princess consort but as eldest madam. This indicated that her identity was the eldest sister-in-law of the prince's princess consort and not the princess consort of the Ding King's residence. After suppressing secondary consort Yang's arrogance, Yili's expression eased and she smiled faintly. Secondary consort Yang, do you have something to say for coming over so early? Secondary consort Yang, who was stunned by her sudden change in expression, regained her senses and her expression changed. She wanted to fly into a rage but the girl in white sitting by the side said uneasily, "Aunt." Secondary consort Yang looked at the girl in white and actually suppressed the anger in her heart. She turned to Yili and said, "This is my maternal family's niece, Chanru." The girl in white stood up and bowed towards Yili and said gently, "Chanru greets cousin-in-law." "Greets cousin-in-law." Yili frowned. The daughter of the Yang family was the niece of the senior concubine, which meant that she was Mo Xiuyao's cousin. Yili was very unfamiliar with this cousin of hers. The main reason was that the Yang family was not a prestigious family. In fact, other than the first-generation Prince Ding Mo Lanyun, who married a princess of the previous dynasty, the Mo family's several generations of princesses did not have prominent family backgrounds. Of course, this was because the men of the Mo family did not need nepotism. On the other hand, it was probably to avoid being feared by the royal family. As far as she knew, Princess Yang didn't have a legitimate brother in her mother's family, and the only concubine-born brother died a few years ago. Then Yang Chanru was the orphan of the concubine-born son of the Yang family. "Cousin, you don't have to be so courteous. Sit down." Prince must have forgotten that he hadn't heard him mention his cousin before, so he didn't have time to prepare a greeting gift. "Please don't blame me." While speaking, Yili took off the ice-type jade bracelet on her wrist and put it in Yang Chanru's hand. She smiled and asked senior concubine sitting on the side, "Cousin, do you live with senior concubine?" Senior concubine glanced at Yili and nodded. "Chanru is still young and has no other relatives. So I brought her here and can take care of her. After all, she is not a girl of the prince's mansion. It's okay to live with me." Yili didn't intend to arrange another courtyard. She nodded and smiled. "It's okay as long as cousin and senior concubine don't feel wronged. If you lack anything, just send someone to tell me. Don't be embarrassed." Senior concubine's eyes moved and said, "That's why I brought her to see you. Chanru is almost 17 years old this year. She should have considered marriage long ago. However, Prince usually doesn't see her and I don't know much about it. Since you are Chanru's representative, then look carefully for her. Also, it's not proper for a girl to be so plain all day. She needs to wear more clothes." Senior concubine said to herself. Yang Chanru, who was sitting at the side, blushed. She lowered her head and refused to look at others. Yili leaned comfortably in the chair and listened to senior concubine speak of her demands. There was a hint of discussion at the beginning, then it was a commanding tone towards the end. Yili looked at Yang Chanru's snow-white robes and couldn't help but frown. The Fu usually deducts cousin's expenses? Even if Mo Shiyao didn't like senior concubine, he wouldn't go so far as to deduct a girl's expenses, right? Looking at Yang Chanru's plain white robes, even her hair was decorated with white ribbons. People who didn't know would think that she was mourning for someone. The Yahuan who had some status in the Fu dressed more appropriately than her. Yang Chanru suddenly raised her head, her eyes filled with tears and panic. She hurriedly said, "No. The Wang Fu didn't mistreat Chanru. Cousin-in-law, please don't misunderstand Cousin Ji. It's Chanru's fault." Yili couldn't help rubbing her forehead. What was this? She rubbed her brow and said to Qing Wan, "Go see if Sun Mama is free. Ask her to come over." Sun Mama came quickly. Qing Wan had clearly told her about the matter, so she brought a steward who was in charge of the Fu's accounts and the expenses. "Greetings to Wang Fei. Greetings to senior concubine." The three bowed in unison. Yili nodded and said, "Sun Mama, you don't have to be so courteous." Sun Mama stood up and said, "Many thanks, Wang Fei. I heard that Wang Fei summoned this old servant for the matter of the side dowager's courtyard's expenses. This old servant acted on my own initiative and called Steward Wang from the accounting room and Zhang Mama who is in charge of expenses. Wang Fei, please forgive me." Yili smiled and said, "Sun Mama, you don't have to be like this. I just arrived and Wang Fei is not familiar with these things. Senior concubine mentioned the expenses of Miss Gu, so I asked you to come over and ask. In that case, Sun Mama Zhang, what about Miss Gu's expenses? If Miss Gu suffers any grievances and outsiders know about it, it will be our Wang Fu's fault." Sun Mama Zhang hurriedly stepped forward and said with a bad expression, "Reporting to Wang Fei, Miss Gu's expenses have always been according to the expenses of the young miss of the Wang Fu. Although there hasn't been a young miss in our Fu for several generations, the previous rules have always been kept. This old servant doesn't dare to deduct Miss Gu's expenses." "Then what is Miss Gu's monthly expenses? If the previous rules are not enough, it doesn't matter if it is adjusted appropriately. Or it can be directly allocated from Mayan Prince's share," Yili said. Sun Mama Zhang glanced at Yang Chanru sitting on the side and said, "Miss Gu has 30 taels of silver to spend every month. The cosmetics she uses are all bought by the Fu. She has 4 sets of clothes for each of the spring, summer, autumn and winter seasons. She also has 2 sets of head ornaments for the beginning of winter and the beginning of summer. She also doesn't dare to reduce her expenses during the holidays. This old servant has served in the Wang Fu for generations and doesn't dare to mistreat Miss Gu." The bookkeeper standing on the side also said, "Wang Fei is wise. Prince and Wang Fei are getting married and everyone in the Fu has rewarded them. The eldest madam received 500 taels, senior concubine received 200 taels, and Miss Gu received 100 taels. The servants in the Fu have also received their rewards. This subordinate doesn't dare to delay and can send the account books as proof." When these words were said, everyone's eyes fell on Yang Chanru. Looking at her white robes and her weak appearance, it was as if she would be blown away by the wind. It really didn't look like she had been mistreated. Sun Mama's upright and serious face flashed with displeasure. "Don't say that the Wang Fu didn't mistreat her. Even if you have mistreated her for so many years, isn't it still the Wang Fu that raised you? The prince and princess just got married. What do you mean by wearing white?" Chapter 89. The maidservants who followed Yi Li from the Yi family also had opinions about this delicate cousin. Fourth Miss was already delicate and moving, but this one was even more fragile than her. Furthermore, the treatment of this cousin was not much different from the treatment of the Yi family's D Miss. When their young miss was in the Yi family, she only received 30 taels of silver a month. Furthermore, this Miss Yang did not have any reputation in the capital. It could be seen that this person did not go out to socialize, so naturally, there was no need for her to spend. The young miss had just gotten married, yet she came over to complain that she was poor. It was too much. Yi Li frowned as she looked at the side grand concubine. It wasn't that she was stingy. She had just arrived at the Wang Fu and could not go against the rules set by the predecessors to increase Yang Chanru's treatment. Even if the Ding Wang Fu was large, it was impossible for them to casually withdraw money without any scruples. Without rules, nothing could be accomplished. Furthermore, the Wang Fu had treated Yang Qianru quite well. Unfortunately, the side grand concubine obviously did not think so. Seeing Yi Li's difficult expression, she couldn't help but angrily say, "What does princess mean? Qianru is still the prince's cousin. Can't it be that a few taels of silver can't be spent? If outsiders know that our Ding Wang Fu mistreats an orphan girl whose parents are dead, the prince's face will not look good." In short, the side grand concubine wanted to put the reputation of mistreatment on Mo Shuyao's head. Then how much does side grand concubine think is reasonable? The side grand concubine frowned and said with an unwilling expression, "It should be 80 taels of silver a month. There are also head ornaments and accessories. How can 2 sets be enough? Qianru can't go out to meet people these few years, and even her marriage has been delayed. In the future there will be many times when she goes out with you. Let Fenghua Building send over 4 sets." Seeing the side grand concubine's matter-of-fact expression, Yi Li couldn't help but roll her eyes in her heart. When did she agree for Yang Qianru to follow her? Even if she did not go out these few years, she could still link it to the Wang Fu. If it wasn't for the Prince Ding mansion with the Yang family's background, they might not even remember the concubine daughter of the Prince Ding mansion. Side imperial concubine, please be careful with your words. Wang Fei is the mistress of the Ding Palace. It was impossible for him to bring an unmarried girl with him when he was walking around outside. Even if there is, it should be a girl from the prince's mansion or a sister from the princess family. Sun Mama said with a serious face. Yi Li couldn't help but praise him in her heart. She didn't want to go on blind dates with a weak girl who would shed tears at the sight of flowers and rain. Hearing Granny Sun's words, Yang Qianru's face turned red. She let out a low cry and clutched her chest. Tears welled up in her eyes and were about to fall. Without waiting for side grand concubine to get angry, Yi Li frowned and said to the 3 people, "Since you've asked clearly, Steward Wang and Mammy Zhang should go back first. In addition, I will allocate 10 taels of silver from my monthly allowance to Miss Biao. Since she's a guest, we can't let Miss Biao suffer." "Yes, we will follow princess's orders." Steward Wang and Mama Zhang responded and retreated. Yi Li continued, "Side grand concubine and Miss Biao should also go back first. As for Miss Biao's marriage, I will discuss it with the prince before giving a reply to side grand concubine." Side grand concubine was unwilling, but when she saw Yi Li's expression of wanting to see them off, she didn't dare to go against Yi Li's intentions. She could only angrily leave with the aggrieved Yang Qianru. After sending the 2 off, Yi Li looked at Sun Mama and said, "Sun Mama, Steward Wang and Mammy Zhang's salaries will be increased by 10 taels this month. Just take it from me." Sun Mama complied and looked at Yi Li, saying, "Actually, Princess doesn't need to pay attention to side grand concubine and Miss Biao. Our Wang Fu has never treated Miss Biao unfairly. We haven't touched a single cent of the inheritance that the Yang family left to Miss Biao." Yi Li helplessly said, "Look at what she's wearing today. What would others think if they saw her like this?" Sun Momo pursed her lips and said, "Princess consort, you may not know this, but this Miss Biao is very strange. It's said that she likes white very much. The clothes we sent for the 4 seasons were all colors that girls like, but Miss Biao said that they were tacky. She was only willing to wear white clothes. If the clothes we sent didn't have white, she would rather wear her old clothes. She ruined a lot of clothes for no reason. The steward of the Fu had no choice but to send white clothes. For the prince and princess's wedding, Mama Zhang had specially ordered people to make a set of peach red and a set of light purple. Who knows? Tacky? Not necessarily, right?" Yi Li thought of another person who liked to wear plain clothes. "In the future there will be many guests in the Wang Fu. We can't let her come out to meet people like this." In the past, the Wang Fu basically didn't interact with outsiders. Now that Mo Shuyao was married and had come out to meet people, it wouldn't do to close the doors and refuse guests. "I'll go back and ask Prince if he wants to change out of all the plain clothes," thinking, Yi Li said with a slight smile. Sun Mama froze for a moment, then immediately reacted, "What does princess mean? I didn't say anything. I just don't like white clothes." Yi Li said with a smile, "Princess, Prince invites you." Mo Shuyao didn't have any servant girls to serve him, so the one who came to deliver the message was one of Mo Shuyao's personal guards. Yi Li nodded and stood to ask, "Where is the prince right now?" The guard said, "The prince is waiting for princess in the water pavilion." "I know." You can go. The Ding Wang Fu could be said to be the largest fu in Jing City. Of course, this was related to the position of the Ding Wang Fu in the Dechu state. The Wang Fu had been remodeled by successive princes for over 100 years. Even though the area hadn't expanded, the scenery inside the Wang Fu could be called the best in Jing City. In the southwest corner of the Wang Fu, there was a natural lake that took up 1/6 of the entire Wang Fu. There was a wooden corridor built on the surface of the lake that led to a water pavilion with 3 rooms in the middle of the lake. The surface of the lake was covered in green lotus leaves, making the lake water ripple. Just walking in, one could feel a faint coolness. It must be a good place to relax in the summer. Waving her hand to stop the servant girls, Yili walked alone along the corridor on the surface of the lake towards the pavilion in the middle of the lake. As expected, she saw Emo Xiuyao sitting in front of the open window, lost in thought. Hearing her footsteps, Emo Xiuyao came back to his senses and said with a smile, "Li." Yili walked in. "What are you thinking about?" Emo Xiuyao shook his head and said with a smile, "I've been busy with some trivial matters these past 2 days. I didn't have time to ask if you're used to it." Yili shrugged and found a place to sit across from him. She said with a smile, "My ability to adapt has always been very good. The people in the Wang Fu are also very good. I'm very used to it." Seeing Emo Xiuyao looking at her with a strange expression, Yili blinked her eyes and said with a smile, "It can't be that you're not used to it, right?" She didn't expect Emo Xiuyao to actually nod his head and said with a smile in a low voice, "I'm indeed not used to it. It seems, it's been many years since I was the only one in this Wang Fu." "And, do you need me to leave?" Yili was a little apologetic. She didn't think that her existence would cause trouble for Emo Xiuyao. Emo Xiuyao laughed involuntarily and shook his head. "How could that be? Li, I thought that we were husband and wife. So, I feel that we need to spend more time together," Emo Xiuyao said. Yili understood. Some people would habitually avoid things that they were not used to, but others would choose to face them head-on. Emo Xiuyao clearly belonged to the latter. For a couple like them who clearly had no feelings before marriage, they needed to cultivate feelings after marriage. "Do you have any good suggestions?" Emo Xiuyao said, "If you have time, you can accompany me to talk or read a book. Or if you don't feel ashamed, I can accompany you for a walk." Chapter 90. Go out. Yili was a bit tempted. She seemed to have forgotten that there was another benefit after getting married. It was more convenient to go out than before. "No problem." Yili nodded, agreeing with Emo Xiuyao's suggestion. Emo Xiuyao was startled when he saw that she didn't hesitate at all. A faint smile appeared on his lips. "You said you wanted to draw a portrait for Ali yesterday. Ali, come over and take a look. What do you think of this?" Yili walked over in surprise. "You're done so quickly?" There was an open painting on the table in front of Emo Xiuyao. In the painting, there was a woman dressed in red standing with a sword. Yili recognized at a glance that the dress and the accessories on her head were the ones she had worn on the day of her wedding. However, the red dress she was wearing was not the heavy and complicated wedding dress embroidered with the phoenix peony. Instead, it was a simple red dress with golden cloud embroidery. There was a golden belt around her waist. The peony between her eyebrows had been replaced by a bright red flame. The woman's hands were dancing. Her expression was bright and dignified, but there was also a trace of arrogance and sharpness. "This is me." Yili looked at the woman in the painting in a daze and softly said. The woman in the painting had a familiar face, but it also seemed a bit unfamiliar. However, that unfamiliar feeling seemed to be the one she was truly familiar with. For some reason, Yili felt that the woman in the painting was very beautiful. She was 100 times more beautiful than her usual self in the mirror. Emo Xiuyao smiled and said, "The beauty dance of the past, one sword moves the 4 directions. Li has the style of Princess Qing Yun of the past." "I haven't." Yili shook her head. She had never wielded a sword in front of anyone before. More accurately, she did not know how to wield a sword at all. Yili was lost in thought as she looked at the cloud-embracing sword in the hand of the woman in the painting. Emo Xiuyao faintly smiled and said, "I feel that this is the real Li Li." Yili was silent. However, her eyes could not move away from the woman in the painting. Indeed, she had seen such an expression on another familiar face before. He came and went freely in the rain of bullets and killed enemies with his bare hands in the rain of blood. That was a completely different life from now. Ever since she accepted reality, she had been trying her best to conform to the standards of women in this era. She also thought that she had gradually forgotten the woman who laughed wantonly in the mud and sweat. But, if she had really forgotten about it, if she had really accepted it, how could she have hidden her skills like this? That day when Li held the cloud-embracing sword, I felt that Li was more beautiful than I've ever seen her. Emo Shuyao seemed to sigh. The image of Yi Li unsheathing her cloud-embracing sword appeared in his mind. Although it was only for a short moment, it was completely different from any other woman's biting cold aura, and the free and unrestrained heroic spirit of brandishing her sword. In that instant, Emo Shuyao thought he was looking at a famous general who had dominated the battlefield. Can you give me this painting? Yi Li asked hesitantly. Emo Shuyao smiled and said, "This was originally meant for you." Ever since the topic of painting had been brought up yesterday, Emo Shuyao knew that Li was just joking. But in his mind from time to time, Yi Li's beautiful appearance on their wedding night, and the scene of her unsheathing her sword that day in the main hall of the Yi residence. So even though there were many things to do in the palace these past 2 days, he still worked through the night to finish this painting. "But you haven't written it yet? What does Li think is appropriate?" Yi Li shook her head. She hesitated and said, "No need. I don't need to take it out for others to admire." She really liked this painting. If she wrote it, what would she do if it was ruined? Emo Shuyao raised an eyebrow and then nodded and said, "All right, since you want to write it, you still need to sign it off." He picked up a brush from the brush holder on the table and ordered, "Help me grind the ink." Yi Li was also curious about Emo Shuyao's handwriting. Just from the painting, when Emo Shuyao said that his painting was not worse than Han Mingyue's, he was not boasting. But how was his handwriting? Emo Shuyao looked at her and smiled. "Li's calligraphy is unique. I might have to disappoint you." Yi Li smiled as she watched him dip the brush in the ink and leave a line of words on the side of the painting. Prince Ding Shuyao presents his wife Li. Emo Shuyao's handwriting was tall and elegant. It looked imposing, but it did not make people feel that it was showing off. Yi Li was very satisfied. She carefully took the painting to the side to dry it and put it away. When she saw the words, "presents his wife Li" on the painting, she suddenly had a strange feeling. She looked up at Emo Shuyao and saw that he was looking at her. If she just looked away, wouldn't she seem guilty? Yi Li could only open her eyes wide and look back. Emo Shuyao smiled faintly and was the first to look away. The strange atmosphere made Yi Li want to leave, but the painting on the table made her reluctant to leave. And if she left like this, wouldn't it mean that she admitted defeat? She had just promised to spend more time with him. Her mind quickly turned. Yi Li quickly changed the topic. "Right, I wanted to discuss something with you. Can you change out of all the white clothes?" Seeing Emo Shuyao raise his eyebrows in confusion, Yi Li asked, "Or do you just happen to like white clothes?" Emo Shuyao shook his head. "I don't have a preference for colors. I'm just used to it." "But why did you think of this?" Based on his understanding of Yi Li, she definitely wouldn't be interested in what color he wore. Yi Li smiled and told him what happened in the courtyard. Emo Shuyao looked at her speechlessly. "So you think that because I wear white she won't wear anything but white?" Yi Li nodded. "That's what I think. But I don't wear white clothes every day." Although his clothes were mostly plain, it didn't mean that he didn't have any other colors. But it's very obvious that every time you appear in front of her, you're probably coincidentally wearing white. Yi Li shrugged lazily. "Li, are you jealous?" Emo Shuyao stared at her for a long time and laughed softly. "Jealous?" Yi Li's face couldn't help but darken. She shot up and said woodenly, "Apologies, my food lacks vinegar." Finishing, she didn't even look at the painting as she turned and walked out. "Prince." A short while later, a Jing appeared at the door and looked at Emo Shuyao. Sun Mama was right. Prince didn't know how to interact with Wang Fei. Wang Fei was so angry that she ran away in a short while. Emo Shuyao gave a faint smile. "Later, send this painting to Wang Fei." Qing Wan and the others followed behind Yi Li, seeing their usually gentle young miss striding away with a black face. They couldn't help but look at each other. The pavilion in the center of the lake was too far from the shore. They couldn't hear what Prince and Wang Fei had said. Qing Xia asked uncertainly, "Did Prince bully Wang Fei?" Qing Shuang's face instantly darkened. "What? Prince bullied Miss?" Qing Wan and Qing Yu helplessly pulled back Qing Shuang, who was about to explode. Qing Wan's mouth couldn't help but twitch. She had seen Wang Fei's skills with her own eyes. She could easily knock out a strong man without even panting. Just based on the fact that Prince was in a wheelchair, could he bully Wang Fei? Qingyu thought for a moment and said, "Let's ask Ajin later. He definitely knows." Qing Shuang twisted her mouth. "He stayed by the shore like us, what could he know?" Qing Xia agreed, "He's been with Prince since he was a child. He definitely knows how Prince made Wang Fei angry. Let's go, Wang Fei has gone far." Chapter 91. Yili walked quickly towards her own yard as she cursed Mo Shuyao in her heart. She must have been blind to think that this guy was gentle. He had even thought that he was pure? That bastard had teased her. Jealous. Idiot, how could she be jealous over a man she had just met? At most she liked him because he coveted her things. What's wrong, Wang Fei? Returning to the yard, Wei Mama came out to greet her. Seeing Yi Li's dark expression, she quickly asked. After leaving the young miss she had raised for so many years, Wei Mama had given Yi Li all the care she had missed in the past few years. She was more concerned about her health than anyone else. Being asked this by the mama, Yi Li felt a bit embarrassed. She knew that she had overreacted. She didn't have the face to say that she had left in a fit of pique after being teased by Mo Shuyao. She quickly pulled Wei Mama and said, "Nanny, didn't I tell you to rest? Be careful that your little grandson won't recognize you if you keep circling around me like this." Lin Mama and Wei Mama's entire family had followed Yi Li to the Wang Fu. Yi Li had placed the capable men of their family in the shops or farmsteads outside to be stewards. The womenfolk were left in her own yard. She did her best to have them serve her as little as possible. Especially since Lin Mama wasn't young anymore. It wouldn't be easy for her to run around with a young person like her. Wei Mama looked at her and said with a bit of sadness, "Young Miss has grown up and doesn't like Nanny, right?" Nanny. Yi Li's head hurt. It was this again. But at least she had moved on from the previous matter. Pulling Wei Mama into the room, Yi Li comforted her with gentle words, causing Wei Mama to smile. "Wang Fei, Ajin is here." Qing Shuang came in and said. Her delicate face was still puffed up with anger. It was clear that she was angry with Ajin outside. "Let him come in." Yi Li teased with a smile. "Who provoked our Shuang er?" Qing Shuang's little face blushed and she stomped her foot and said, "Young miss. It's all because of that damned Ajin. Just because he's one of Prince's people, he's always putting on a poker face, as if someone owes him 500 taels of silver." Yi Li sighed helplessly. "Qing Shuang, you're the one who's being unreasonable. Ajin just doesn't like to talk. He's far from a dead face." Mo Jingli was the one with the deadpan face. Ajin was at most a man of few words. Even her second brother could not compare to that cold face of hers. Ajin came in with the box and looked at Qing expressionlessly. Qing Shuang also knew that the person in question had heard her bad-mouthing someone behind their back. She turned her face away guiltily. Yi Li laughed in her heart, but on the surface she looked at Ajin with a serious face. "Ajin, what's the matter?" Ajin put the box on the table and took 2 steps back before saying, "Ajin was ordered by His Highness to deliver this. Prince said that he did not purposely make Wang Fei angry. Wang Fei, Darren, please be magnanimous and do not take offense." He stuttered as he spoke. Yi Li knew what was going on. She looked at Ajin with a smile and said, "Ajin, who taught you that last sentence?" Ajin's face turned red. He looked dazedly at Yi Li and didn't know what to do. Wang Fei and Prince were both smart people. Lying in front of them would always be seen through. Ajin silently remembered this fact. Yi Li smiled and added, "Your Prince definitely wouldn't say something like that. Also, I'm not angry. I'll take the item. You can go back." Ajin silently left. Yi Li opened the box in a good mood. As expected, there was the portrait she had been thinking about. She had just been thinking about what excuse to use to get the portrait back. She hadn't thought that Mo Shuyao would be so considerate and immediately send Ajin to deliver it. Unfolding the portrait on the table, Yi Li stared at the woman in the portrait and sighed softly. Mo Shuyao's voice couldn't help but ring in her mind. "I feel that this is the real Li, so beautiful." Qing Shuang, who was standing at the side, exclaimed excitedly, "Miss, was this painted by Prince? So beautiful." Wei Momo also nodded with satisfaction and smiled. "Prince is really considerate towards Mississippi." It seems that eldest master and eldest young master didn't misjudge him. Yili was speechless. Was there a need for a portrait? In the blink of an eye, it was time to return home. These 3 days, Yili could be said to have adapted well in the Ding King's fu. Even Lin Momo and Wei Momo, who had been worried, relaxed. Only the prince and the princess consort hadn't consummated yet. This made the 2 nannies very dissatisfied. However, they weren't the only ones who were worried and dissatisfied. There was also Sun Momo from the Ding King's fu. Sun Momo had watched Imo Xiuyao grow up and knew her master's temper well. She wasn't dissatisfied with the new princess consort. She even hinted that Lin Momo and Wei Momo would think of a way. The Ding King's fu was harmonious and respected their miss very much. When they returned home, Miss would officially take charge of the Ding King's fu. How could the 2 nannies be dissatisfied? Therefore, when they returned home, the smile on their faces was like a blooming flower. The Yi family's welcome was exceptionally grand. Not only did Minister Yi and Wangshe bring Yi Shan, Yi Lin, and Yi Rong, even the married Yi Zhen and Yi Ying brought their respective husbands back. Yili wasn't curious that Yi Ying would come back to join in the fun. However, Yi Zhen, as the concubine of the Southern Marquis heir, was able to let the Southern Marquis heir accompany her back. Once they entered the door and met old Madame Yi, Yili was pulled away by her sisters to have a private chat. Imo Xiuyao stayed in the main hall to talk with Minister Yi and Imo Jingli. Qing Yixian, where Yili used to live, was still there. The sisters sat at the stone table in Qing Yixian's courtyard to talk. Yizhen looked at the maidservant standing not far away and then looked at Yili, who was wearing a light purple robe. She wore a pearl tassel hairpin, pearl earrings, and a lotus-patterned warm jade bracelet on her wrist. Her expression was indifferent and there was a smile on her lips. It seemed that she had an additional noble aura compared to when she was at home. She couldn't help but sigh enviously. It seems that 3rd sister is having a good time in the Ding King's residence? Yili smiled. Thank you for your concern. Everything is fine. Yi Shan pulled Yili and asked non-stop, such as whether the Ding King's residence was big or not, whether it was beautiful, who were the people in the residence, whether they were easy to get along with, and so on. Yili wasn't in a hurry. She waited for her to ask enough before she answered some of the questions. Yi Shan didn't get an answer and wanted to ask again. However, she was pulled away by Yi Lin, who was sitting beside her. She could only shut her mouth in disappointment. I heard that the Ding King's residence has a former princess and concubine. Has 3rd sister seen them? Yi Shan kept asking non-stop and Yi Ying couldn't get a word in edgewise. She could only sit by the side with an indifferent face. At this time she stared at Yili and asked. Yili looked at Yi Ying in surprise and frowned. 4th sister, are you not feeling well recently? It hadn't been long since they last met and Yi Ying's appearance had changed a lot. She felt that she had become thinner and frilier. In the past, when she was in the Yi family, although Yi Ying was weak, Wangshe had taken good care of her. Her face always had an alluring blush. But now, without that blush, her entire person suddenly became darker. Although she had put on some rouge on her face, it wasn't as beautiful and natural as before. Yi Ying's gaze changed slightly and she faintly lowered her eyes. Thank you for your concern, 3rd sister. I'm just a little tired. Chapter 92. Yili sighed in her heart. Ying had really changed a lot. It seemed that the ability of virtuous concubine Zhao old concubine to teach people was beyond Yi old madame's reach. If you are tired, rest more. No matter what, your body is the most important. Without a good body there is nothing. Yili advised a few words before answering Yi Ying's question. Sister-in-law has been practicing Buddhism all year round. She only pays her respects when she returns. As for Su old concubine, thinking of the eccentric Su old concubine in the fu, Yili couldn't help but frown and said lightly, Father Su Fei does not need to meet often. Yi Shan exclaimed, then isn't there only 3rd sister and Prince Ding in the Ding King fu? When these words came out, not only Yi Shan, Yi Zhen and Yi Lin, but even Yi Ying couldn't help but reveal a trace of envy. In the fu there were no elders above, no sister-in-law or sister-in-law, and even no sister-in-law to deal with. It was simply every newly married woman's dream. But when she thought of Imo Xiuyao's situation, Yi Ying faintly felt that she was balanced. Compared to being ridiculed and sympathized with outside, being wronged at home was still bearable, right? It seems that third sister and prince's relationship is also very good. Third sister is really lucky. Yishan sighed and said faintly. Ying didn't believe it and asked suspiciously, is Prince Ding's temper really that good? I heard others say that people with physical disabilities generally have weird tempers. Yili frowned and said, Prince is not difficult to get along with. She didn't know if Imo Xiaoyao's temper was good, but at present they were getting along very well. Ying also knew that Yili was a little unhappy because of her words, but she was never used to lowering her head to Yili. For a moment the atmosphere was a little stiff. Yizhen looked at the two and could only open her mouth to change the topic. In a few days the palace will hold a banquet to send off the envoys from various countries. Have third sister and fourth sister received the invitation? Yili shook her head and said, no. Yilin smiled and said, the envoys from various countries are here to celebrate third sister and prince's wedding. Even if the others don't attend, the prince and third sister will definitely attend. But how did eldest sister find out faster than third sister and fourth sister? Yizhen smiled and said, this time, it was the emperor who gave our family's Shitzi the responsibility. Naturally, I know some things first. Yishan's eyes lit up and said, then will eldest sister be going later? Yizhen nodded her head shyly and happily. The crown prince said that he would bring me to the palace this time. After saying this, she looked gratefully at Yili. Clearly, Marquis Nanshitsi had decided to bring a side consort like her to the palace banquet because she had just become Princess Ding's younger sister. Although she was only a secondary consort, Yizhen now felt that she could stand firm in the Marquis Fu. After all, even the princess consort didn't have a younger sister who was a Jiaoyi and two younger sisters who were Wang Fei. Based on this point, if she could give birth to an heir, she would have a chance to compete with the princess consort in the future. Even if eldest sister can go, you definitely can't go. Ying glanced at Yishan and said coldly. Yishan immediately blushed and said embarrassedly, fourth sister, I don't think so. Ying didn't even look at her and said, who has the time to care about what you think? It's just that some people can't see their own status clearly. Yishan's eyes were red and tears welled up in her eyes. In the end she could only get up and run out. Yi Ying's words were too harsh. Although they were directed at Yishan, Yilin still felt uncomfortable. Seeing Yishan run away, she also got up and chased after her. Even Yizhen's expression was not good. Yili looked strangely at Yi Ying and then at Yizhen. Yizhen sighed helplessly and said softly, fourth sister, even if you're in a bad mood, don't take it out on sixth sister. Yi Ying gripped the handkerchief in her hand and sneered, I'm in a bad mood? Eldest sister, ask third sister if she's in a good mood? Greetings to the three young ladies. Old Madam invites Princess Ding over for a chat. A maid from Rongla Hall came over to pass on the message. Yi Ying glanced at Yili and sneered, third sister, don't you want to know what happened to me? You'll know when you get there. Yili shook her head and got up to look at Yi Ying. Fourth sister, your temper is fine at home. You're already married but you're still like this. Do you think Madam can still protect you all the time? Yi Ying's expression darkened and she stubbornly turned her head away and didn't speak. Yili didn't force her. Although they were blood-related sisters, she didn't have the feelings for them as compared to her former cousins. She also didn't have the same feelings for her cousins in the Su family. She could persuade them she would. If they didn't listen, there was nothing she could do. When they arrived at Rongla Hall, old Madame Yi was sitting in the flower hall dressed in a festive manner. When she saw Yili coming in, she smiled like a flower. Lier, come and let grandmother take a look. Yili walked over and sat beside old Madame Yi. Old Madame Yi sized up Yili and nodded her head in satisfaction. Are you used to living in the Ding Palace these few days? Are the servants in the palace easy to order around? Did anyone make things difficult for you? Yili smiled. I've made grandmother worry. Lier as well. The servants in the palace are also very respectful. Old Madame Yi nodded her head repeatedly. That's good, that's good. Then you and Prince. Yili said, Prince is also easy to get along with. Old Madame Yi was in a difficult position. She looked at Yili and said, grandmother is talking about you and Prince. You and Prince, when do you plan to have a child? Prince is not young anymore. Yili was slightly embarrassed. Old Madame Yi pondered for a long time and wanted to ask if they had consummated their marriage. Old Madame Yi stared at her and said, don't lie to grandmother. If grandmother can't tell, then she has lived for so many years in vain. You and Prince haven't consummated your marriage yet, right? Old Madame Yi obviously understood that this granddaughter was different from the others. She quickly gave up beating around the bush and asked directly. He could also tell. Yili thought for a while and said calmly, "Grandmother, you don't have to worry. Prince and I don't feel that we are familiar with each other. It's not too late to get along with each other for a while. Moreover, we are getting along very well now, so there's no hurry." Old Madame Yi looked at Yili's calm face and secretly shook her head in her heart. Then, who will take care of the affairs of the prince's mansion? The external affairs will naturally be taken care of by Prince. The affairs of the prince's mansion will be handed over to me after we return. Yili replied. Old Madame Ye's expression became slightly better. At least this granddaughter knew how to grasp the power of the prince's mansion. Old Madame Yi was really helpless towards Yili and Ying, these two granddaughters. Ying looked smart, but in fact she was brainless. After marrying into the prince's mansion, she didn't know how to grasp the power of the prince's mansion. Every day she was jealous of her concubines and made herself look like a resentful wife. In contrast, Yili, who didn't reveal her talents, was obviously much smarter. Just by looking at the attitude of the servants who followed Yili from the prince's mansion, one could tell that she had a good life in the Prince Ding mansion. But she didn't care about Prince Ding too much. Even as Princess Ding, if she wanted a lifetime of glory and wealth, she still had to rely on Prince Ding. "Lear, tell grandmother honestly. Is it because of Prince Ding's leg that you—" Old Madame Yi waved away the servants in front of her and grabbed Yili to ask in a low voice.